Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
I first met Tim about 2 years ago when he walked into the restaurant where I was working as a hostess. We chatted while he waited for the rest of his party to arrive. He was tall, kind of thin, but with a toned build, and had this great, warm smile. I could tell he was a little shy from the way he spoke, soft, with indirect compliments, and how he avoided making eye contact. It was clear he was interested in me, but not in the pushy way some guys can be. The type that would have taken my playful touches as a cue to invite me back to their place. Tim, though, was different. He seemed like the kind of guy who genuinely wanted to get to know me. Now, I'm not a supermodel, but I know I've got my own appeal. My name's Kathy, and I'm 5 feet 4 inches, about 160 pounds, but it's all in the right places, my chest and hips. I've got a small waist, thick legs, long dark hair, and a smile that can light up a room. According to Tim, though, my best features are my deep green eyes, with my lips coming in a close second. At least, that's what he says. But when we were in bed, he wasn't exactly focusing on my eyes or my smile. As the night went on, I could tell Tim wasn't really into the whole gathering. The group he was with were clearly his co-workers, and while they praised him several times, he didn't seem comfortable. So, I decided to step in. I walked over to their table and told him he had an emergency phone call. He looked confused, saying no one knew he was there. I just smiled and guided him away, leading him into our employee lounge for a little break from the party. "Where's the phone?" he asked. "Well," I began. "You seemed a little uncomfortable, so I thought that I would get you out of there. If you want to go back, just tell them that it was nothing and continue with your party. But if you do want to leave, I'll go back and tell them that you were called away." "What do I have to pay you for doing this?" he asked nervously. I quickly wrote down my phone number on a piece of paper and said, "Call this number tomorrow, and we'll see what happens." Tim left the restaurant, and I went back to his table and explained that he had been called away. I didn't give a reason, so that he could tell them whatever he wanted, and there'd be no conflicts in our stories. The next day Tim called me, and I wheedled my way into a date. We had so much fun that I didn't want it to ever end. He did things for me that the thin, pretty girls take for granted and bigger girls get only before we put out, if ever. He was a perfect gentleman, and I loved the way he looked at me. Oh, sure, I sometimes wish that he was a little more forceful, but I was crazy about him, so it didn't matter. He closed his eyes and placed his lips against mine with a gentleness that I still remember today. And his arms, they wrapped themselves around me and just held me like I was the most precious object in the universe. At that moment, to him I really think I was. He also didn't just run his hands all over me grabbing whatever he could. When we broke the kiss after what seemed like forever, but was probably only a few seconds, the look in his eyes told me everything I needed to know. This was my guy, and I was his. Over the next few months our relationship progressed at its own pace. We kissed more and often, we made out, and finally long after I was ready for it we had sex. I don't know why it took us so long, but it was great. I was kind of expecting to have him disappear afterwards like so many guys do. I mean, I'm not a BBW by any means, but I am a little bigger than your average girl, so I was used to guys who just wanted to take a spin on me and then send me back to the showroom. When Tim showed up the next morning before he went to work, which had never happened before, I was expecting him to break things off, since he'd had his ride. I almost tried to avoid him, just so I could enjoy the glow from the sex for a little longer before the crushing blow. He looked so sad, and then hugged me and gave me flowers and told me I was the most special thing he'd ever seen. I almost cried. I was so happy because I was just not used to this. A few months later Tim got really serious and scared, and I got nervous again. My mind told me that even this saint of a man had just gotten enough big girl sex and was ready to move on. "Just go ahead and say it," I told him. My voice was harsher than I wanted it to be because I thought I knew what was coming. "Kathy, I have a problem," he said. "So what's your problem? You want a skinnier girlfriend, right?" I snapped. He looked kind of shaken. After we do it, You mean after we have sex, you what?" I asked. As you can see, I was ready, or so I thought. "Well, I don't want to leave you. I just want us to be together more. So I was hoping, I know you're not ready to get married, you said, but..." My head exploded. Did he mention marriage? "I was hoping we could live together," he said. I was shocked. I knew I was pretty, and there were some men who liked my body. Actually, most men liked my body, but they only wanted it on a trial basis. Tim, on the other hand, really loved me. I sat there with my mouth open. I was 27 years old, had probably screwed at least 15 or 20 guys, but I had never been anyone's girlfriend before Tim, and now not only had he mentioned marriage, but he wanted me to live with him. Half the guys I screwed didn't even want to be seen with me afterwards, and this guy wanted me to be solely his, permanently. Over the years, as you can tell, I developed a tough skin out of necessity. But that night it disappeared, and if I hadn't already been in love with the galut, that night would have sealed it. Our relationships did have one glaring problem, but it was minor. We were compatible in every way that matters, and rarely argued. He was content to spend most of his time just being with me. Of course, a lot of that time we spent in bed, but we were both happy, so who cares? Our biggest problem was Tim's shyness. He almost hated to be around people. I'm not talking about parties. I'm talking about any group of people where he didn't know or feel comfortable with everyone there. It took him 8 months to build up the courage to meet my parents. When it came to going out with my friends or coworkers, well, I was becoming a hermit. For the most part, it didn't bother me, but damn it if I was finally in love, and with a great guy. I wanted all of my friends to at least see him once or twice. I tried on several occasions to make it happen, but there was always something that came up. Usually, it would come up at the last minute, so he couldn't make it. I always ended up going alone or not going. Some of my coworkers were beginning to think the photo on my desk was a fake. I'd hear the meaner ones talking behind my back. Really, who would want to be with that cow? Or, those fat girls will say anything. So when Rochelle Davenport, our district manager, had a big party planned at her house, I put my foot down. Tim, I said, if you can't manage to spend one evening with my coworkers, for me, then maybe you don't love me as much as you claim to. Maybe this relationship has no future. I'll do it, he said sadly. The expression on his face told me that maybe I'd pushed him too far. But he'd agreed to it, so whatever. You're a great guy. Baby, I just want to share you with my friends for one night, I said. You're handsome, you've got a great job, a great car, and my friends will love you, I assured him. So, 2 nights later, Tim dressed in a pair of dress pants and a jacket and waited for me on the couch in our living room. It used to be his living room, but we both live there now. It of course took me longer to get ready than it did for him to wash his Camaro, shower, and get dressed. This was mainly because I was pulling out all of the stops this time. I wanted everyone to see me with my sweetie, but I wanted them to know that I was a beautiful, desirable woman. In short, for one night I wanted them to see me the way he did. When we got to Rochelle's house, the Camaro's V8 growl announced our presence in a way that said, "Look at me, god damn it, I'm here." As we got out of the car, all eyes were on us. First, they looked at me. My dress was tight enough to show the curvature of my big hips without being overly tight, and it was low cut enough that my tits were on the verge of dropping into someone's lap if I leaned too far forward. But the thing that drew the most attention was my man. They'd all heard the stories of shy, reclusive Tim, but most of them didn't believe he existed. And the few that did think that there had to be something wrong with him for him to be with me. Most of them thought I was a trifle big, and the ones that realized that I was just voluptuous thought I was a hooker. When Tim came around and took my hand, the evening was sealed. Hell, my life was sealed, and I'd be water cooler gossip forever. Rochelle dragged her emaciated, but over to greet us almost as soon as we parked on her lawn. Her husband, I'd heard him described as a hot older guy, was with her. He was definitely older, but the hot part, not so much. He was a little too Grandpa Munster for me. He took my hand and welcomed me to their home. Their house was huge. It was like a European castle dropped into the suburbs. After Tim and I made the rounds, which meant I dragged him around to make sure every single living organism at the party, including the pets, saw us together, he quickly retreated into the shadows in a corner. Damn him. I wanted him to be more outgoing for just one night. I had to give serious consideration to what my future would be like with him. Now that most of the guys there had seen me with him, and Tim was kind of hot, maybe I could upgrade. Several of the women present had tried to make a run at him, and he quickly rebuffed their attentions. During the evening, I'd noticed that whenever my glass was empty, Rochelle's husband was there in a second to refill it. By the time he offered to give me a tour of their house and the grounds, I was feeling no pain. As soon as we got upstairs away from the crowd, I noticed his hand on my hips, and it was no accident. "I've heard a lot about you," he breathed into my ear. "Like what?" I asked. If it hadn't been for all of the liquor, I'd have moved his hand a long time ago, but the combination of liquor and frustration was amazing. Like, maybe you'd be better with an older lion as opposed to a younger mouse. He leaned in and kissed me. It felt really good to have someone go after what they wanted. He didn't wait. He didn't ask. He just saw what he wanted and took it. My failure to stop him only led to him becoming even bolder. The next thing I remembered, he had me in a room upstairs on my back, making out like we were teenagers. We only stopped when someone opened the door and looked in, looking for the bathroom. "Hey, Kathy, your, honey, was looking for you." That tore it for me right then. Tim couldn't even hold a conversation with a few people that were important to me for a few minutes. I locked the door and noticed that I felt kind of woozy as I stepped back towards the bed. I looked at the clock next to the bed. Had I really been away from the party for nearly an hour? The clock must be wrong. I wasn't that drunk. As I stretched out on the bed, I noticed that Ron was already naked. Pretty sure of yourself, aren't you? I asked. Nope, just pretty sure of you, he smirked. I wonder what he meant by that, but I didn't have time or the inclination to figure it out. Old Ron started having sex with me. It was such a change from having to always be the aggressive one when it came to sex. After I got started, old Ron didn't last too long. Hey, I said. Shut up, fat blob. What? I asked in surprise. What did you say? Ron just got off the bed and roughly tore at my dress, ripping it in the process. I stood before him almost naked in my prettiest lingerie. I had intended to put on a little show for him after the party, but it seemed like someone else would get the benefit of it now. Dance for me, baby, he slurred, lying back on the bed. Let me watch you move those big water-filled melons and shake that fat butt. I guess this was his way of talking sexy, but it was really insulting. And something else I noticed, Tim usually spent a lot of time cuddling me and making me feel good. He made me feel like I was beautiful and special. I suddenly realized that Tim's reticence wasn't because he was timid. When we were alone, he was far from it. Tim waited for permission because he loved me and respected me. Tim also wanted both of us to enjoy it when we were together. Right now, it seemed that this was all about Ron. The way he had me feeling right now was as if I was just some hooker he'd picked up. But because I was drunk, and because it was so different, I decided to go with it for a while longer. I had been dancing for a couple of minutes and saw Ron smiling. I couldn't tell if he was enjoying it or laughing at me because I'm not much of a dancer. Ron jumped off the bed and threw me down on it. He rolled me over and just started having sex with me again. It hurt like hell. I was about to protest, but he shot back. Shut up and like it, Tubby. What? I asked again. This was so bad it was almost assault. The only thing good about it was that it was over quickly. He grunted a couple of times and then rolled over trying to catch his breath. I just laid there trying to figure out what I was going to do. I couldn't scream assault because I'd willingly come up here with him, and more importantly, I didn't want him to know about this at all. Plus, there was the problem of Rochelle. If she found out about this and didn't believe me, she could make my job a living hell for me or even get me fired. So, I just lay there and finally fell asleep. The next thought I had was that there was someone talking. When I opened my eyes, I noticed that it was light again. That meant it was morning and I'd been here all night. Where was Tim? How would I explain this? I heard the voices again. What did you say her name was again? Asked Ron in a loud whisper. It's Kathy, you doofus. Now go get her out of here, replied Rochelle. Well, you invited her. Why can't you get rid of her? Whined Ron. You screwed her and left her here, so it's your problem, snapped Rochelle. It's only my problem because her little boyfriend turned you down, said Ron. I guess that aging body and those sagging tits, what little there is of them, have lost their charm. If he was here, he'd be my problem. So she's yours, snapped Rochelle. But she works for you. Why can't you do it? Asked Ron in a quiet voice. You didn't seem to have any problem talking to her last night, said Rochelle. Oh, you know how it is every once in a while. You want a big one, she continued. She wasn't even good though, whined Ron. If I had paid anything, I'd want my money back. Hey, her eyes are open, go ahead, said Rochelle. At that point, Ron came over to the bed and I noticed that the daylight didn't do much for him. He definitely looked much worse in the morning. Hey, Bonnie, he said, smiling. Kathy, I said. Whatever. I called you a cab. Shouldn't you get dressed? He asked. Where's Tim? I asked. Oh, your honey boy. He left last night, said Ron in a frustrated tone. Took one look at you sprawled out there and just ran out, he continued. Several of the ladies at the party offered to go home with him, but no soap, he said. Rochelle knows you had sex with me? I asked. Of course, we have an open marriage. That's the point of these parties, to try out different people and different things. They add a little fire to our relationship, he said proudly. Actually, we hate each other so much, we couldn't even think about having sex, he said. The only reason we don't get a divorce is because we'd be worse off alone, he said. A pretty messed up relationship, that's why it's open, he said. Well, I'm pretty sure it's messed up mine. It's going to take a lot to get him to forgive this. I don't think he will, said Ron. He seems like the true blue type, Ron said. You know, like he was madly in love with you. Like you were, he laughed, his dream girl or something. I'm sure seeing you laying there with your legs all open just broke his poor little heart. He laughed again. I turned around and looked at him. Why would you let him come in here? I asked. I didn't, Rochelle did. He turned her down flat, and she really wanted him. A lot of the women at the party did, but he wasn't having it. He said he loved you, and he's going to marry you. He laughed again. So Rochelle brought him up here to show him that you had no problem doing it, so he should too, said Ron. She can be a really vindictive bitch when she wants something, he laughed. So the two of you just screwed up my life for the fun of it? I hissed. Hey, you're a big girl, a very big girl. You knew why we came up here, he replied. I got what was left of my clothes and put them on, and of course my dress was ruined and would no longer close. I found my cell phone in my purse. I called Tim because I didn't want him to see me like this. It would only make things worse. I was hoping that he'd gone to work, so I could slip into our place and fix myself up. Then I'd call him and be waiting for the confrontation when he got home. This would be our first major fight, but I was sure if I promised him it would never, ever happen again. Maybe in time we'd get past this. Tim didn't pick up. In fact, my call went straight to voicemail as if his phone was turned off. Tim never turned his phone off. He always answered my call on the first ring. He was obviously angry. The cab arrived and the driver blew his horn. I spotted Rochelle on my way out. I don't know what made me do it, but seeing that skinny woman standing there smirking at me caused me to have a temporary loss of brain function. So, as I passed her, I just took a swing at her and knocked her flat on her butt. I got into the cab holding my dress together, and with as much dignity as I could muster gave the driver my address. He must have been trying for a big tip because he didn't say a single word to me. He just drove. When I got to our building, though everything seemed normal, I felt a sense of dread. I looked around and didn't see Tim's Camaro in our parking spot, so he wasn't here. That was a good thing, I thought. As I got to our floor, I saw that someone was moving in or moving out. There were a lot of suitcases lining the halls. They looked like our luggage, but then most suitcases really do look the same. I got my keys from my purse. Rochelle and her husband hadn't heard the last of this, but first I had to straighten out my life. For some strange reason, I couldn't get my key in the lock. Maybe I was still slightly drunk. I concentrated and it just didn't fit. I stomped all the way down to the first floor, to the building manager. Mr. Coletti was home luckily. I knocked on his door, and the music stopped and the door opened a crack. Mr. Coletti, there's something wrong with my key. I can't get in, I said. He didn't even open his door all the way, which was unusual. He was one of the most open, friendliest people we knew. There's nothing wrong with your key, miss, he said. Miss? I wondered. When did I become miss? Then why won't it fit in the lock? I asked in my most polite tone. Because the locks were changed at the request of the tenant of record, he said. And in the middle of the night, I might add. I couldn't think. I started crying, and when he saw this, Mr. Coletti just shook his head and closed his door. I called Tim again and left a message for him. I told him how sorry I was and how he didn't understand what had happened. I told him that I loved only him and that I'd do anything to make it up to him. Then with no one else to turn to, I called my mom. Before she got there, I went back up to the hall outside the apartment and changed into some other clothes. She drove me back to her house without saying a word. As we got in, I guess the silence was too much for her. What did you do? She asked. What? A guy you barely know locks me, your own daughter, out of our apartment, and all you want to know is what did I do? I snapped. Kathy, your dad and I aren't stupid. We know about the life you used to lead. And even though we only met him once, we really thought that Tim was the guy for you. He loves you so much, and after he called us 2 days ago, we just assumed. He called you? I asked. Yep, 3 times, she said. The first call he just hung up. I guess he didn't remember that with caller ID we knew who he was. But then he called back, and it was the cutest thing I'd ever seen. So old-fashioned too, she said. What was? I asked. Well, he said that he was going to do something for you, Kathy. Something that he really was afraid to do. Felt really uncomfortable with, but you really wanted it, and you'd promised to do anything he wanted in exchange. We were thinking, oh my God, he's going to make her do something really kinky. But he was calling to ask your dad's permission to ask you to marry him. Can you believe that? Nobody does that anymore. When she said that, I felt the tears well up, and my chest got tight. The third time he called, he wanted to show me the ring he'd gotten for you, so I could tell him whether or not you'd like it. You'd have to be crazy not to. What did you think when you first saw it? She asked. Then I started crying, and my mom asked me again, what did you do? Kathy, please tell me you didn't turn him down. Kathy, I'm your mother, and I love you, but you're not getting any younger. You're cute as hell, but you may never get another offer this good. He's a really nice young man. He's handsome. He's got a good job, and he obviously loves you. That boy really thinks you're something special. Why wouldn't you marry him? She demanded. My mom's mouth dropped open as if she'd just realized something. That's why you've never brought any boys home to meet us. She stuck her hand over her mouth and looked at me and then said, You're a lesbian. No, Mom, I'm not a lesbian. I'm a 304, I answered. Then why haven't you brought any guys home? 304s get lots of guys, she replied. Mom, they don't want a relationship with me. They just want to screw me and flee me. Tim was the first one that wanted to stick around, I said. Then why didn't you want to marry him? She shot back. Mom, it's a long story. Right now I just want to sleep. I called in and told my boss that I wouldn't be in for a couple of days. I thought I heard laughter in the background as I hung up. Then I called Tim and left another message for him to please call me. I tried calling his job, but the lady who answered the phone asked who I was, and after a moment asked me to leave a message. When I asked her if he was at work, she said that company policy forbid the release of any information about their employees. But just yesterday you told me exactly which restaurant he was having lunch at and gave me directions, I said. It's a new policy, she said. Then she told me to have a nice day, bitch, and hung up. I called Tim again and left yet another message. Then I tried to go to sleep, but I just couldn't get comfortable. I wasn't used to this bed, and I wasn't used to sleeping without him. I couldn't believe how much I missed him wrapping his arms around me. Finally, I drifted off to sleep, but it didn't last long. I dreamed about Rochelle screwing Tim. Then I heard my cell phone ring and woke up. I tried to get to the phone before it stopped ringing, but I couldn't find it in time. I dropped the phone on the bed, and it started ringing again. Hello, Tim, I said into the phone breathlessly. Nope, it's Tina, said the voice. Tina was one of the women I worked with. She was more of an acquaintance than a friend, so I was wondering why she'd be calling me. What do you want, Tina? I snapped. How are you feeling, Kathy? She asked. There were crickets chirping in the silence, so she spoke up again. Well, Kathy, seeing as how you've probably broken up with that Tim guy, I was wondering if you'd be interested in making a trade? What are you talking about? I snapped. Well, a girl like you can't be too choosy, so I was thinking I'll give you my brother's phone number, and you give me Tim's? I hung up the phone. Tina's brother Matt was married and had 3 kids, 2 of them with his wife, another with one of their teenage neighbors, and regularly beat the shit out of both women. Did everyone know about last night? I called Tim and left another message. This made the 10th one I'd left. I wondered whether he was listening to them and just didn't want to call me back, or if he just hadn't gotten the messages yet. I called the number for his voicemail service and entered his security PIN number. I listened to all of his messages. Most of them were from me, but there were 3 that got my attention. One was a message from the jewelry store that told him that he couldn't return the ring because it had been inscribed, but maybe they could cover the inscription or change it if he found someone new. The next was from one of those skanks he worked with telling him she'd seen him in his office, and she thought he looked like he needed cheering up, so she was asking him out to lunch or dinner, his choice. The bitch even told him that if he chose dinner, he could upgrade to the deluxe package that included breakfast at her place for no extra charge. I should walk over there and beat the crap out of that bitch, I thought. But it was the last message that really hurt me. It was from his mother, and she told him that she loved him, and she hoped he'd feel better soon. She told him that she understood what he had lost, but sometimes the best way to get over a bad situation was to start again. Then she told him about some floozy he used to go out with who'd been back from college for a couple of years, and that maybe he should give her a call when he felt ready. It seemed like the whole world was ready to write me off, but I was determined to put this behind us and get him back. I guess this is where I should start putting together my nefarious plan to get back at Ron and Rochelle for what they did to my relationship, but there was nothing I could do. Ron didn't want me because he really liked skinny women like Rochelle. Rochelle didn't care that Ron screwed me because she knew that every once in a while, he just wanted to stick it to a big girl for a change of pace. I didn't ever want to see Ron again, and sex with him was revolting. It just made me miss Tim more. I called Tim thousands of times until one day he just changed his number and I couldn't get the new one. I tried waiting by the apartment, but he'd pull away every time he saw me, and they wouldn't let me inside the building. I couldn't get in the building he worked in either. Then one day it happened. I saw the Camaro pull up and Tim got out. He'd gotten his hair cut, and he looked great. He hadn't seen me yet, and he walked around to the passenger side. He reached in and a girl got out of the car. He took her hand and crushed my heart all in the same movement. She was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. She had long cornflower hair, big open blue eyes, and a smattering of freckles around her nose. But the thing that hurt the most was the way she looked at him. She looked at him the way he used to look at me, and he gave her that look right back. I knew then that it was over between Tim and me. There was no way I'd ever get him back. That was 3 years ago, and I still think about him now. I have a full life, though. I go to work, still at the same restaurant chain. I got a bit depressed over Tim for a while, and did pick up a bit of weight. So, I'm no longer a hostess, but I'm the best damn dishwasher they have. Outside of work, I put in a lot of time posting ads on Craigslist. I know that there's another Tim out there somewhere. I just have to find him. I also moved into an apartment right down the street from Tim's place. It's not too close because I don't want to be accused of stalking them or anything. Besides, with my telescope, I can see right in their windows. It's almost like I was there with them. I'm just waiting for that bitch to make a mistake, and she will because she's only human. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
Hey, welcome back to Cheating Tales Lab. We've got a brand new story lined up for you today, and we're thrilled to have you here. We hope you enjoy it. Let's get started. Alfred Farrell stood at the kitchen sink, his weathered 40-year-old hands methodically washing dishes. 15 years as a postal worker had given him an appreciation for routine, but lately, something fell off. His wife Hope's sudden obsession with her appearance hadn't gone unnoticed. New clothes, a different hairstyle, hours spent primping in front of the mirror. At first, Alfred had been flattered, thinking perhaps she was making an effort for him. But as the weeks wore on, a gnawing suspicion took root in his gut. The sound of Hope's muffled giggles drifted from the living room, grating on his nerves like sandpaper. He dried his hands and padded quietly towards the source of the sound. Hope was sprawled on the couch, phone pressed to her ear, a secretive smile playing on her lips. As he entered, she startled, sitting up abruptly. "Oh, I've got to go," she said hurriedly into the phone. "Talk to you later, Beth." Alfred raised an eyebrow. "Beth from your book club?" Hope nodded, a touch too enthusiastically. "Yes, we were just discussing our latest read. You know how we get carried away." He did know. He also knew that Hope's book club met on Tuesdays, and it was Curly Thursday. But he said nothing, merely grunting in acknowledgement before retreating to the laundry room. As he sorted through the clothes, his hand brushed against Hope's purse. A slip of paper fell out, a receipt. Alfred's eyes widened as he read the itemized list. La Perla, $300 for a scrap of lace he'd never seen. The gnawing in his gut intensified. That night, after Hope had fallen asleep, Alfred lay awake, his mind racing. He thought about the 15 years they'd been married, the routines they'd settled into, the comfortable silences that had once felt like home but now seemed to stretch between them like a chasm. He made a decision. The next day, while Hope was at work, Alfred installed a discreet GPS tracker on her car. It was a simple device, easily hidden beneath the passenger seat. As he activated it, a wave of guilt washed over him. This wasn't who he was. He'd been a Boy Scout for Christ's sake. Trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, thrifty, brave, clean, and reverent. But desperate times called for desperate measures. Over the next week, Alfred watched as the little blinking that represented Hope's car made frequent trips to the Sunset Motel across town. Each time, his heart sank a little lower. Finally, he couldn't take it anymore. He called in sick to work, something he hadn't done in years. His supervisor, Dave, seemed concerned. "You all right, Farrell? You never take time off." "Just a bug," Alfred lied smoothly. "I'll be back tomorrow." Good as new. As soon as Hope left for work, Alfred followed at a discreet distance. His palms were sweaty on the steering wheel as he watched her pull into the Sunset Motel parking lot. He parked across the street, his heart pounding so loudly he was sure everyone could hear it. And then he saw him. Justin Hendricks, the popular local radio DJ and Hope's co-worker. Alfred had met him once at a company picnic. Charming, funny, with a voice like melted chocolate. Everything Alfred wasn't. He watched, feeling like he was having an out-of-body experience, as Hope practically ran into Justin's arms. Their lips met in a passionate kiss that made Alfred's stomach turn. With shaking hands, he raised his phone and snapped a few photos. Evidence. That's what he needed now. As he lowered the phone, his eyes met Justin's across the parking lot. For a split second, recognition flashed in the other man's eyes. Then Hope pulled him into the motel room, and the door slammed shut. Alfred sat in his car for a long time after that, staring at nothing. He felt hollow-gutted. But beneath the pain, something else was stirring. A cold, calculating anger that surprised him with its intensity. His mind was already formulating a plan. Over the next few weeks, Alfred maintained a convincing facade of normalcy at home. He smiled at Hope over breakfast, asked about her day, and even surprised her with flowers one evening. All the while, he was meticulously gathering evidence. His first stop was the Sunset Motel. Sam, the owner, was a chatty man in his 60s who seemed flattered by Alfred's attention. Alfred spun a tale about writing a novel about small-town life, and Sam was more than happy to regale him with stories about the motel's colorful history. "You must see all sorts here," Alfred said casually one afternoon, leaning against the front desk. Sam chuckled. "Oh, you wouldn't believe the half of it. Affairs, mostly. People thinking they're being so clever, but it's always the same story." Alfred's hand tightened on the edge of the desk. "I bet you have some security measures in place, though, for insurance purposes, if nothing else." Sam nodded towards a camera in the corner of the lobby. "Just the one there. Records everything that happens in this lobby." Alfred's eyes gleamed. "Fascinating. Mind if I take a look at how it's set up? For the book, you know." Sam hesitated for a moment, then shrugged. "Why not? Come on back." In the small office behind the front desk, Sam showed Alfred the ancient computer that served as a motel security system. It didn't take much for Alfred to convince Sam to let him study it for his novel. Once alone, Alfred's fingers flew over the keyboard. He may have been a postal worker, but he'd picked up some IT skills during his stint in the military. Within minutes, he had access to months of security footage. He found what he was looking for almost immediately: Hope and Justin entering and leaving the motel at regular intervals. Sometimes they looked furtive, glancing around nervously. Other times they were so wrapped up in each other they might as well have been alone in the world. Alfred copied the relevant footage onto a flash drive, his face impassive. When Sam returned, Alfred was leaning back in the chair, a pleasant smile on his face. "Find what you needed?" Sam asked. Alfred nodded. "Oh, yes. Very enlightening. Thank you, Sam." Back at home, Alfred turned his attention to Hope's email. She'd always been careless with her passwords, using the same one for everything: their anniversary date. The irony wasn't lost on Alfred, as he easily gained access to her account. What he found made his blood run cold. Months of intimate exchanges between Hope and Justin, plans for their rendezvous, declarations of passion, and worst of all, lies about working overtime at the radio station to meet Justin. Alfred read every single email, saving copies to an external hard drive. By the time he was done, it was well past midnight. He heard Hope stirring upstairs and quickly shut down the computer. As he climbed into bed beside her, Hope mumbled sleepily, "Everything okay? You were up late." Alfred forced a smile. "Just catching up on some work." "Go back to sleep, honey." Hope snuggled closer to him, and Alfred lay rigid, staring at the ceiling. He thought about the vows they'd made, the life they'd built together, all of it based on a foundation of lies. In that moment, something inside Alfred hardened. The pain was still there, a dull ache in his chest, but it was overshadowed by a cold, calculating anger. He reached for the bedside table, pulling out a small notebook. In the dim light of the alarm clock, he began to write. Every detail of Hope's betrayal, every piece of evidence he'd gathered, it would become his journal, a record of his emotional journey. And though he didn't know it yet, it would become crucial to his plan. The next morning, Alfred called his supervisor at the post office. "Dave, it's Alfred. I need to take a week off. Family emergency out of state." Dave sounded concerned. "Everything all right, Farrell? This isn't like you." Alfred forced a note of worry into his voice. "My sister's in the hospital. Nothing too serious. But I need to be there. You understand, right?" Of course. Take all the time you need." With that taken care of, Alfred set his plan in motion. His first stop was a small, cash-only apartment across town. The landlord didn't ask questions when Alfred handed over 3 months' rent in cash, using the name Nick Buford. Next, he visited a graphic designer in the next town over. The young woman looked skeptical when Alfred explained what he wanted. A life-size promotional poster? For a surprise anniversary party. Alfred nodded, his face a mask of enthusiasm. My wife's always wanted to be a movie star. I thought it would be fun to make her the star of her own movie poster. He handed over the photos he'd taken of Hope and Justin outside the motel. The designer's eyebrows rose, but she took the job, agreeing to create a life-size design. Back in town, Alfred made a stop at the home of Marissa, a mutual friend of his and Hope's. She was delighted to see him. Alfred, what a nice surprise. Come in. Over coffee, Alfred spun a tale about planning surprise parties for both Hope and Justin. I was hoping you might have spare keys to their houses, he said casually. You know, for decorating and such. Marissa hesitated for a moment, then smiled. Oh, why not? It's for a good cause, after all. As he left Marissa's house, keys to both Hope and Justin's homes in hand, Alfred felt a twinge of guilt. He'd never been a good liar before, but he was learning fast. That evening, as Hope chatted about her day over dinner, Alfred nodded and smiled in all the right places, but his mind was elsewhere, running through the logistics of his plan. He had learned that morning that there were budget cuts coming at work. His job might be on the line. It added a sense of urgency to his actions. After dinner, while Hope was engrossed in her favorite TV show, Alfred slipped down to the basement. He powered up his computer and began researching divorce laws. Property division, alimony, grounds for divorce. He took meticulous notes. Then he turned his attention to his personal assets, investments, savings accounts, their joint checking account. He began the process of liquidating what he could, moving money around in a complex shell game. As he worked, Alfred felt a strange sense of calm wash over him. For the first time in weeks, he felt in control. Hope might have betrayed him, but he would have the last laugh. He glanced at the clock. It was well past midnight. He could hear Hope moving around upstairs, probably wondering where he was. For a moment, he considered going up, playing the role of devoted husband one more time. Instead, he turned back to his computer. He had work to do, preparing for all contingencies. The night air was thick with anticipation as Alfred Farrell crouched in the shadows outside the WKRP radio station. His heart hammered against his ribs, a steady rhythm that matched the ticking of his watch. 11:45 p.m. 15 minutes until the cleaning crew's shift change. 15 minutes until he set his plan in motion. He adjusted the backpack slung over his shoulder, feeling the weight of the rolled-up poster inside. The life-size image of Hope and Justin, caught in a passionate embrace outside the Sunset Motel, felt like a bomb waiting to detonate, and Alfred was about to light the fuse. As the last of the cleaning staff trickled out of the building, Alfred made his move. He slipped inside, his footsteps echoing in the empty lobby. The security guard was doing his rounds on the upper floors. Alfred had memorized the schedule over the past week. He had exactly 7 minutes before the guard returned. With practiced efficiency, Alfred unrolled the poster and began hanging it in the center of the main lobby. His hand shook slightly as he smoothed out the creases, revealing the damning image inch by inch. Hope's face, frozen in ecstasy. Justin's hands, possessive and hungry. It was obscene. It was perfect. Stepping back, Alfred surveyed his handiwork. The poster dominated the space, impossible to miss. But something was missing. He reached into his backpack and pulled out a can of red spray paint. In bold, dripping letters, he wrote beneath the image, "We know what you did." The words seemed to pulse in the dim light, accusing and final. Alfred allowed himself a grim smile. Let them try to explain this away. With 2 minutes to spare, he retreated to a hidden alcove and pulled out his laptop. His fingers flew over the keys as he hacked into the station's email server. One by one, messages pinged out to every employee, from the lowliest intern to the station manager himself. The subject line read, "New art installation in the lobby, don't miss it." As he heard the elevator ding, signaling the guard's return, Alfred slipped out a side exit. The cool night air hit his face, and he took a deep breath. Phase 1 complete. He drove to the hotel he'd booked near his fictional sister's house, his alibi secured. As he checked in, he made a show of looking haggard and worried, playing the part of the concerned brother to perfection. "Room service, please," he told the sympathetic desk clerk. "I've been on the road all day visiting my sick sister. I am exhausted." Once in his room, Alfred set up his laptop and connected to the station's security cameras. He'd planted a back door in their system weeks ago, and now it gave him a front-row seat to the chaos that was about to unfold. He settled back against the headboard, a glass of whiskey in hand. On the screen, the night guard was making his final rounds. Any minute now, he would turn the corner and come face to face with Alfred's handiwork. Alfred raised his glass in a silent toast. "Showtime," he murmured. Hope Farrell hummed to herself as she applied her lipstick, blissfully unaware of the storm that was about to break over her head. She'd woken up to an empty bed, Alfred having left early for work, or so she thought. Her phone buzzed with a text from Justin. "Can't wait to see you at the charity event tonight. You're going to knock them dead in that new dress." Hope smiled, a mixture of excitement and guilt twisting in her stomach. She pushed the guilt aside, as she had been doing for months now. Alfred would never know. He was too trusting, too caught up in his own routine to notice what was happening right under his nose. As she left the house, Hope never noticed the figure watching from across the street. Alfred waited until her car had turned the corner before making his move. He entered the house, their house, with the spare key he'd never returned. For a moment, he stood in the entryway, memories washing over him. Their first night here, carrying Hope over the threshold. Christmases, birthdays, lazy Sunday mornings, all tainted now. Alfred shook off the nostalgia and got to work. He moved through the rooms like a whirlwind, methodically creating chaos. He overturned drawers, scattered papers, smashed picture frames. But it wasn't random destruction. No! Every move was calculated. He focused on Hope's belongings and their shared spaces, leaving his own things largely untouched. A message hidden in the mayhem. This was about her, not him. As he worked, Alfred planted tiny cameras throughout the house. In the bedroom, the kitchen, the living room. Each one carefully hidden, ready to capture Hope's reaction when she returned home. In the study, Alfred paused. He pulled out a sheet of paper and began to write. The words flowed easily, all the pain and betrayal of the past months pouring onto the page. When he was done, he read it over. "Hope, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. I know about Justin. I know about the Sunset Motel. I know about the lies, the deceit, the betrayal. Every moment, every touch, every whispered promise. I know it all. Did you think I was too stupid to notice? Too blind to see what was happening right in front of me? I may be just a simple postal worker, but I'm not a fool. I've taken what's mine. Don't bother looking for me. Don't bother trying to explain. There's nothing left to say. Goodbye. Hope. I hope it was worth it. Alfred." He folded the letter and placed it on Hope's pillow, a landmine waiting to be triggered. Before leaving, Alfred gathered up the important documents he'd need: birth certificate, social security card, bank statements. He also took a few sentimental items. His grandfather's watch, the baseball signed by his childhood hero, the photo album from their honeymoon. Let Hope wonder why these specific things were missing. As a final touch, Alfred picked up the phone and dialed 911. When the operator answered, he disguised his voice, pitching it higher and adding a tremor of fear. "Please, you have to help. I just saw someone breaking into the house across the street. 1242 Maple Drive. They're still inside." He hung up before the operator could ask any questions. The police would arrive soon, adding another layer of chaos to Hope's homecoming. Alfred took one last look around the house that had been his home for 15 years. Then he walked out the door, leaving behind the wreckage of his old life. Alfred sat in the sterile environment of his local bank, his face a mask of calm as he systematically dismantled his financial life. The teller, a young woman with concerned eyes, watched as he closed account after account. "Are you sure about this, Mr. Farrell?" she asked, her voice tinged with worry. "That's a significant amount of money to transfer offshore." Alfred nodded, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Quite sure, thank you. I'm making some lifestyle changes." As the last of his and Hope's joint accounts was drained, Alfred felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He'd spent weeks researching offshore banking, setting up a labyrinth of transfers that would be nearly impossible to trace. Hope wouldn't see a penny of it. Next stop, the credit card companies. One by one, Alfred canceled every card they shared. He could almost hear the distant sound of Hope's wallet becoming worthless. Sitting in his car outside the bank, Alfred pulled out his phone. He stared at the screen for a long moment before composing an email to his boss at the post office. "Dear Dave, I regret to inform you that I must resign from my position, effective immediately. Personal circumstances have arisen that require my full attention. I apologize for the short notice and any inconvenience this may cause. Thank you for your understanding. Sincerely, Alfred Heureux." He hit send before he could second-guess himself. 15 years of service ended with a few taps on a screen, but it was necessary. He couldn't risk anyone at work connecting him to what was about to unfold at the radio station. Alfred's next task was perhaps the cruelest, but he felt no remorse as he sealed the envelope. Inside was a comprehensive dossier of Hope and Justin's affair, hotel receipts, email printouts, photos from the motel. On the front, in clear block letters, he'd written, "Mrs. Faith Hendricks." He dropped the package in a mailbox across town, imagining the bomb it would detonate in Justin's home. Let him feel the sting of betrayal, too. As the sun began to set, Alfred drove to the long-term parking lot at the airport. He pulled into a spot near the back, away from the security cameras. From his trunk, he retrieved a suitcase he'd packed for this very purpose. He placed the suitcase on the passenger seat, making sure it was clearly visible. On top, he left a printed itinerary for a one-way flight to Bangkok, departing in 2 days. Let them chase shadows halfway around the world. His final stop was the small apartment he'd rented under the name Nick Buford. It was sparsely furnished, but it had everything he needed: a bed, a desk, and most importantly, a top-of-the-line computer setup. Alfred settled into the chair, powering up the multiple monitors. On one screen, he pulled up the feed from the hidden cameras in his and Hope's house. Another showed the security footage from the radio station. A third displayed local news sites, ready to catch any breaking stories. He leaned back, a tumbler of whiskey in hand. The pieces were all in place. Now, he just had to watch it all burn. As night fell, Alfred Farrell disappeared, and Nick Buford, a man with no past and an uncertain future, began his vigil. Hope Farrell's heels clicked against the polished floor of the WKRP radio station lobby, the sound echoing in the early morning quiet. She was running late for the charity event planning meeting, her mind still fuzzy from a night of stolen moments with Justin. As she rounded the corner, her steps faltered, then stopped completely. There, dominating the lobby wall, was a life-size poster of her and Justin locked in a passionate embrace outside the Sunset Motel. Hope's breath caught in her throat, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure everyone could hear it. Beneath the damning image, blood-red letters screamed, "We know what you did." "Oh my God," she whispered, her perfectly manicured hand flying to her mouth. Around her, the lobby began to fill with arriving employees. Gasps and whispers erupted as each person caught sight of the poster. Hope stood frozen, feeling dozens of eyes boring into her. "Hope, what's going on? Why is everyone—" Justin's voice cut off abruptly as he entered the lobby. His face, usually so confident and charming, drained of all color. Their eyes met across the room, panic and shame mirrored in each other's gaze. In that moment, Hope knew their carefully constructed house of lies was crumbling around them. "Farrell, Hendricks, my office now." The station manager's voice boomed through the lobby, cutting through the growing murmurs. Hope and Justin followed him in silence, feeling like condemned prisoners walking to the gallows. As the office door closed behind them, shutting out the chaos of the lobby, Hope felt a wave of dizziness wash over her. Would either of you care to explain what the hell is going on out there? The manager's face was purple with rage, a vein throbbing in his forehead. Hope opened her mouth, but no words came out. What could she possibly say? Justin, ever the smooth talker, tried to salvage the situation. Sir, I can assure you, this is all just a misunderstanding. Misunderstanding? The manager slammed his fist on the desk. There's a billboard-sized photo of you two going at it like rabbits in my lobby. Do you have any idea what this could do to the station? To our reputation? Hope sank into a chair, her legs no longer able to support her. This couldn't be happening. It had to be a nightmare. You're both suspended, effective immediately, pending a full investigation, the manager continued. Now get out of my sight before I do something I'll regret. As they left the office, Hope's phone buzzed with a text from Alfred. Hope, something's happened at the house. You need to come home now. Hope's heart, already racing, kicked into overdrive. What else could possibly go wrong? She raced home, her mind a whirl of panic and confusion. As she pulled into the driveway, she saw police cars parked outside. Her hands shook as she fumbled with her keys. The moment she stepped inside, Hope's world tilted on its axis. The house was in shambles, drawers upended, pictures smashed. It looked like a tornado had torn through their once peaceful home. Mrs. Farrell, a police officer, approached her. We received a call about a break-in at this address. Can you tell us if anything's missing? Hope stumbled through the house in a daze, barely registering the officer's words. When she reached the bedroom, she saw it, a letter, placed neatly on her pillow amidst the chaos. With trembling hands, she unfolded the paper and began to read. Alfred's words, cold and cutting, laid bare every secret, every lie. He knew. He had always known. Hope's legs gave out, and she collapsed to the floor, the letter clutched to her chest. As the reality of what she'd lost crashed over her, Hope began to sob, great heaving cries that shook her entire body. The police officers exchanged uncomfortable glances, their suspicions growing with each passing moment. Across town, Faith Hendricks stared at the package that had just arrived, its contents spread across her kitchen table. Photos, emails, hotel receipts, irrefutable evidence of her husband's infidelity. With a calm she didn't feel, Faith walked to the front door and changed the locks. Then she called her lawyer. When Justin arrived home that evening, he found divorce papers waiting for him on the porch. And in a small, nondescript apartment, Alfred Farrell, now Nick Buford, watched it all unfold on his bank of monitors, a tumbler of whiskey in hand. He observed the chaos he had orchestrated with a mixture of grim satisfaction and a deep, aching sadness. Cheers, Hope, he murmured, raising his glass to the screen. I hope it was worth it. Hope Farrell stood in the checkout line at the local grocery store, her cart filled with the bare necessities. Her hand shook slightly as she reached for her wallet, knowing what was coming but praying for a miracle nonetheless. I'm sorry, ma'am, the cashier said, a hint of pity in her eyes. Your card's been declined. Hope felt the stares of the people in line behind her, heard their impatient sighs. Her cheeks burned with humiliation as she fumbled for another card, then another, each one useless, canceled by Alfred in his meticulous destruction of their shared life. I'll have to come back, she mumbled, abandoning her cart and fleeing the store. In her car, Hope let out a strangled sob. How had it come to this? Just weeks ago, she'd had it all, a loving husband, a good job, financial security. Now it was all gone, evaporated like morning dew under the harsh light of her betrayal. Her phone buzzed. Justin. Hope considered ignoring it, but desperation won out. They needed to find Alfred, to try and salvage something from this wreckage. Any luck? She asked, not bothering with pleasantries. Justin's bitter laugh crackled through the speaker. Oh yeah, tons of luck. All bad. The PI we hired can't find a trace of Alfred. It's like he's vanished into thin air. Hope's grip tightened on the steering wheel. We have to keep looking. He's got all our money, Justin. I can't even buy groceries. You think I'm doing any better? Justin snapped. The station fired me. My wife's divorcing me. I'm sleeping on my buddy's couch. This is all your fault, you know. My fault. Hope's voice rose incredulously. It takes two to have an affair, Justin. You were just as involved as I was. Yeah, well, it wasn't my husband who went psycho and destroyed our lives, was it? The call ended abruptly, leaving Hope alone with her thoughts. She drove aimlessly, her mind racing. There had to be a way out of this nightmare. There had to be. Her phone rang again. Hope's heart leapt, hoping it was Justin calling back to apologize. Instead, she saw her mother's number on the screen. Mom, she answered hesitantly. Hope Elizabeth Farrell. Her mother's voice was ice cold. Would you care to explain why I just received an anonymous email detailing your indiscretions? Hope's blood ran cold. Mom, I can explain. Save it. Her mother cut her off. Your father and I are beyond disappointed. We raised you better than this. Until you come to your senses and beg Alfred's forgiveness, don't bother calling us. The line went dead. Hope pulled over to the side of the road, her vision blurring with tears. She was alone, truly, utterly alone. Meanwhile, in his rented apartment, Alfred, or rather, Nick Buford, leaned back in his chair, a satisfied smile playing on his lips. He'd just hit send on the email to Hope's parents, another nail in the coffin of her former life. He turned his attention back to the monitors, watching Hope break down in her car through the traffic cam he'd hacked. Part of him wanted to reach out, to comfort her. But that part was quickly silenced by the memory of her betrayal. You made your bed, Hope, he murmured. Now lie in it. As the weeks turned into months, Hope and Justin's desperate search for Alfred continued to yield nothing. Their relationship, once passionate and exciting, deteriorated into a series of bitter arguments and recriminations. This is useless, Justin shouted during one particularly heated exchange. We're never going to find him. And even if we did, what then? You think he's just going to hand over the money and forgive us? Hope sank onto the worn couch in Justin's friend's apartment, where they'd both been staying. We have to keep trying, she said, her voice hollow. What else can we do? Justin ran a hand through his unkempt hair, his once handsome face haggard with stress. I don't know, Hope. I just don't know anymore. As they sat in defeated silence, neither of them aware of the hidden camera capturing their every move, transmitting it all back to the man they were so desperately seeking. 6 months after Alfred Farrell's disappearance, a new novel hit the shelves. The Postman Always Knows Twice by M.B. Fowler became an overnight sensation. Critics hailed it as a gripping tale of betrayal and revenge. Readers couldn't put it down, and talk shows clamored to interview the mysterious author. Hope Farrell stood in the local bookstore, staring at the display of novels with a mixture of disbelief and horror. The cover showed a stylized image of a man in a postal uniform, his back turned, walking away from a woman reaching out to him. It was too close to home, too familiar. With shaking hands, she picked up a copy and began to read. Page after page, her own story unfolded before her eyes. The names were changed, certain details altered, but there was no mistaking it. This was her life, her affair, her downfall, laid bare for the world to see. It can't be, she whispered, drawing curious glances from other shoppers. It can't be him. But deep down, she knew. Alfred, quiet, unassuming Alfred, had outplayed them all. Across town, Justin Hendricks was having a similar revelation. He'd been channel surfing in his dingy studio apartment when he saw a familiar face on the screen. It was Alfred, looking more confident and put together than Justin had ever seen him. So, Mr. Fowler, the talk show host was saying, your novel has struck a chord with readers everywhere. What inspired you to write it? Alfred, or M.B. Fowler, as he was now known, smiled enigmatically. Well, Barbara, I think we've all experienced betrayal in some form or another. I wanted to explore what happens when someone decides not to just lie down and take it, but to fight back. Justin fumbled for his phone, dialing Hope's number with trembling fingers. "Are you seeing this?" he hissed when she answered. "It's Alfred. He's written a book about us." "I know," Hope replied, her voice hollow. "I'm holding a copy right now." As Alfred's book tour continued, his star only rose higher. He appeared on more talk shows, gave interviews to major newspapers, even hinted at a possible movie deal. With each appearance, he gained more sympathy as the wrong spouse who had turned his pain into art. Meanwhile, Hope and Justin watched their lives crumble further. They consulted lawyers about suing for defamation, but without hard evidence that the novel was about them, and with Alfred's meticulous changes to protect himself legally, they were advised it would be a losing battle. "He's ruined us," Hope said dully, staring at the cease and desist letter their lawyer had received in response to their inquiries. "Completely and utterly ruined us." Justin, who had been pacing the small office, suddenly whirled on her. "No, Hope, you ruined us. You and your inability to keep your damn mouth shut about our affair. If you hadn't bragged to your friends, if you hadn't been so careless, none of this would have happened." As they descended into yet another argument, neither noticed the small camera hidden in the potted plant in the corner of the lawyer's office, transmitting their distress to a man miles away. Alfred, now comfortably settled in a luxurious apartment paid for by his book success, watched the feed with a mix of satisfaction and unexpected melancholy. He had won. He had his revenge. So, why didn't he feel as triumphant as he'd expected? Shaking off the moment of doubt, Alfred turned his attention to his laptop. He had charitable donations to make, anonymously, of course. Let the town see how their once-beloved radio personality and his mistress had fallen, while a mysterious benefactor supported local causes. It was the perfect final touch to his plan, the ultimate victory. The courtroom was silent as the judge delivered her verdict. Hope sat rigid in her chair, her once stylish clothes now worn and shabby. Across the aisle, Alfred, looking every inch the successful author in a tailored suit, listened impassively. "In the matter of Farrell versus Farrell," the judge began, "this court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Alfred Farrell. Given the evidence presented of Mrs. Farrell's infidelity and Mr. Farrell's significant contributions to the marriage, the division of assets will be as follows." Hope barely heard the rest. It was over. Alfred had won again. The careful documentation of her affair, the financial records showing how he'd supported her through graduate school, the character witnesses attesting to his upstanding nature and her recent erratic behavior. It had all added up to this moment. As the court adjourned, Hope watched Alfred stride confidently out of the room. He didn't even glance in her direction. She was nothing to him now. Less than nothing. Weeks later, Hope sat at her small kitchen table, pen hovering over a blank sheet of paper. She'd lost everything. Her job, her reputation, her family's support. Alfred's book was still topping the bestseller list, a constant reminder of her shame. In desperation, she decided to make one last appeal. "Dear Alfred," she wrote, her handwriting shaky, "I know I have no right to contact you, no right to ask for anything, but I'm begging you, please. Can we talk? I know what I did was unforgivable, but I never meant to hurt you. I never stopped loving you. Please, Alfred, I have nothing left. No one left. You're my only hope." She sealed the letter with tears in her eyes, clinging to a shred of hope that somewhere, deep down, Alfred still cared. 3 days later, a large manila envelope arrived at Hope's apartment. Her heart leapt. Had Alfred read her letter? Was this a response? But as she tore it open, her hope turned to ashes. Inside was a formal cease and desist order, threatening legal action if she attempted to contact Alfred again. It was signed by his lawyer, not even by Alfred himself. Hope sank to the floor, the papers scattered around her. It was truly, finally over. Across town, Justin Hendricks packed the last of his meager belongings into a battered suitcase. The town that had once adored him now shunned him at every turn. No one would hire him, not even for the most menial jobs. Every stranger's glance felt accusing. Every whispered conversation seemed to be about him. He couldn't take it anymore. With no destination in mind, Justin tossed his suitcase into his car, the one possession he'd managed to keep, and drove away from the town that had been his home for so long. He didn't look back. Meanwhile, Alfred Farrell stood in the local animal shelter, surrounded by the barks and meows of abandoned pets. He'd started volunteering here a few weeks ago, finding an unexpected solace in caring for these forgotten creatures. As he walked down the row of kennels, a pair of soulful brown eyes caught his attention. A mixed-breed dog, probably part lab, part who knows what, watched him cautiously. The sign on the kennel read Max, 3 years old, abandoned. Something in the dog's wary gaze struck a chord in Alfred. Here was another being who had been betrayed, left behind by those who should have cared for him. "Hey there, Max," Alfred said softly, crouching down. "How about we start over together?" Max's tail gave a tentative wag, and as Alfred filled out the adoption papers, he felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time. A flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, he could learn to trust again, to love again. It wouldn't be easy. The pain of Hope's betrayal still lingered, a dull ache in his chest. But as he clipped a leash onto Max's collar and led him out of the shelter, Alfred felt the first stirrings of a new chapter beginning. "Come on, boy," he said, scratching Max behind the ears. "Let's go home." As they walked out into the sunlight, Alfred Farrell, author, divorced, and now dog owner, took his first step towards a future unburdened by the weight of betrayal and revenge. Max trotted alongside him, his paws padding softly on the sidewalk. For a moment, Alfred allowed himself to imagine a life filled with simple pleasures, long walks in the park, quiet evenings by the fireplace, the unconditional love of a loyal companion. But as they reached Alfred's car, a flicker of movement across the street caught his eye. There, half hidden behind a parked van, stood Hope. Her once perfect hair was limp and unkempt, her designer clothes replaced by a shabby sweater and jeans. Their eyes met for a brief, electric moment. Alfred felt a surge of conflicting emotions, anger, pity, a ghost of the love he'd once felt. For a heartbeat, he considered crossing the street, speaking to her, offering what? Forgiveness? A second chance? Max whined softly, drawing Alfred's attention back to the present. He looked down at the dog, then back up at Hope. She took a hesitant step forward, hope blooming in her eyes. Alfred shook his head once, firmly. Then he opened the car door, helped Max inside, and drove away without looking back. As the shelter receded in his rearview mirror, Alfred felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The chapter of his life that included Hope was over. He had exacted his revenge, written his story, and now it was time to move on. He glanced at Max, who was watching the world go by with eager curiosity. "Well, boy," Alfred said, reaching over to scratch behind the dog's ears. "Looks like it's just you and me now. Ready for a new adventure." Max's tail thumped against the seat in response. As they drove home, Alfred's mind wandered to his next book project. Perhaps a lighter tale this time, something about new beginnings and second chances. He had a feeling he'd have plenty of inspiration. The sun was setting as Alfred pulled into his driveway, casting long shadows across the manicured lawn of his new home. A modest but comfortable house bought with the proceeds from his bestseller. As he and Max walked up the path, Alfred felt a sense of peace settle over him. Inside, he unclipped Max's leash and watched as the dog cautiously explored his new surroundings. Alfred moved through the house, turning on lights and shedding the persona of M.B. Fowler, successful author, like an old coat. In his study, he paused before the wall of framed clippings, reviews of his book, photos from his talk show appearances, the New York Times bestseller list with his name at the top, mementos of his triumph, his revenge. For a moment, he considered taking them down. But no, they were part of his story now, a reminder of how far he'd come and what he'd overcome. Max padded into the room, pressing against Alfred's leg. Alfred looked down at the dog, then back at the wall of memories. "You know what, Max?" he said softly. "I think we both deserve a fresh start." He reached out and straightened one of the frames, a small smile playing on his lips. The past couldn't be erased, but it didn't have to define his future. As the night deepened, Alfred settled into his favorite armchair, a notebook open on his lap. Max curled up at his feet, a warm, comforting presence. The house was quiet save for the scratch of pen on paper and the occasional contented sigh from the dog. Alfred wrote late into the night, pouring out ideas for his new novel. But this time, instead of a tale of betrayal and revenge, he found himself writing about redemption, about the healing power of unexpected connections. As he finally set down his pen and prepared for bed, Alfred realized he felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time: excitement for the future. He had survived the storm of betrayal, navigated the turbulent waters of revenge, and now found himself on the shores of a new beginning. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities. But for now, as he drifted off to sleep with Max, snoring softly beside the bed, Alfred Farrell was content. The story of the betrayed postal worker was over. The story of Alfred Farrell, author and dog owner, was just beginning. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comment section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there. Before we dive into today's story, please subscribe to Cheating Tales Lab. That would help us a lot. I hope you enjoy this story. Let's begin. Howard Steele's eyes narrowed as he scanned the quarterly reports spread across his desk. The numbers were good, better than good. They were exceptional. Quantum Innovations was poised to dominate the tech market for another year. He allowed himself a small smile of satisfaction. 20 years of ruthless business acumen had built this empire, and he'd be damned if anyone tried to take it from him. The insistent buzzing of his phone cut through his concentration like a bandsaw. Howard glanced down, ready to silence it, when the hospital's number flashed across the screen. A jolt of adrenaline surged through him, primal and electric. "This is Howard Steele," he answered, voice steady despite the sudden hammering of his heart. The nurse's voice was professional calm. It did nothing to quell the rising tide of parental dread. "Mr. Steele, your son Simon has been admitted with injuries. He's asking for you." Howard was already moving, long legs eating up the distance to the elevator. "I'm on my way." The drive to the hospital was a blur of traffic lights and horn blasts. Howard's mind raced through possibilities. A car accident? A bar fight? Simon wasn't the reckless type, but at 19, who knew what trouble he could have stumbled into? The emergency room assaulted his senses, the sharp tang of disinfectant, the cacophony of beeping machines and hushed voices. Howard spotted Simon immediately, hunched on an exam table. His son's usually confident demeanor was gone, replaced by something small and broken. His left arm was in a cast, and bruises were already blooming on his face like dark flowers. "Dad," Simon croaked, his voice raw. Tears welled in his red-rimmed eyes. Howard crossed the room in 3 strides, placing a gentle hand on Simon's uninjured shoulder. "What happened, son?" Simon swallowed hard, Adam's apple bobbing. "I saw Mom with Steve." He paused, the words seemingly stuck in his throat. "In your bedroom." The world tilted sideways for a moment. Howard's grip on Simon's shoulder tightened, though his face remained impassive. He'd built an empire on his ability to mask his emotions, to never show weakness. Now, that skill was being put to its ultimate test. "Tell me everything," he said, voice low and controlled. The story spilled out of Simon in ragged bursts. Walking in on Lana and their neighbor, Steve Shelton, tangled together on the bed Howard had shared with his wife for 20 years. The shock, the confusion, the attempt to call his father. Then Steve, all drunken aggression, grappling with Simon, the sickening crack as his arm broke against the doorframe, and Lana helping Steve lock her own son in the guest room, before they both fled like thieves in the night. As Simon finished, a maelstrom of emotions raged behind Howard's carefully neutral expression. Betrayal, white-hot and searing. Anger, a slow-burning coal in the pit of his stomach. Concern for his son, the only person who truly mattered now. "I'll handle this," Howard said, squeezing Simon's shoulder. His voice was steel wrapped in velvet. "You're safe now. That's what's important." Simon nodded, some of the tension easing from his frame. He trusted his father implicitly. Howard Steele was a force of nature, a man who made things happen through sheer force of will. If he said he'd handle it, it would be handled. Howard left the hospital with a plan already forming. Also, Howard noticed Simon's injuries were not that serious. It seemed like he over-exaggerated his injuries. Simon might lied, but Howard didn't think about it too much. Right now, all he can think about is confronting Lana and Steve. He drove home, the familiar streets now seeming alien and hostile. The house loomed before him, a monument to 2 decades of lies. Inside, the silence was oppressive. Howard moved through the rooms like a ghost, noting the signs of Lana's hasty departure. Dresser drawers hung open, hangers scattered on the closet floor. In the master bedroom, the sheets were rumpled, reeking of betrayal and cheap cologne. A quick check of his home office confirmed his suspicions. The safe was empty, cleared of cash and crucial documents. Howard's jaw clenched. This wasn't just infidelity. This was theft, acting on instinct honed by years of cutthroat business deals. Howard drove to Steve's house. As he pulled up, he spotted them, Lana and Steve, loading suitcases into Steve's ostentatious sports car. They moved with the easy familiarity of longtime lovers, their betrayal on full display. Cold fury crystallized in Howard's veins. He approached, footsteps measured and deliberate. "Going somewhere?" His voice cut through the night air like a whip crack. Lana froze, guilt and defiance warring on her face. Steve, never the brightest bulb, tried to puff himself up to look intimidating. He wilted under Howard's arctic glare. "Howard, please," Lana began, her voice tight with panic. "It's not what you think." Howard didn't let her finish. His fist connected with Steve's jaw with a satisfying crunch. The younger man stumbled back, blood trickling from his split lip. "You broke my son's arm," Howard said, his voice eerily calm. "Now I'm going to break you." What followed was a symphony of pure aggression from Howard. Howard's fist rained down on Steve, years of pent-up rage finding release. He barely registered Lana's screams, her attempts to pull him off. When he finally stepped back, Steve was a crumpled heap on the driveway, moaning pitifully. Howard turned to Lana, his eyes cold and hard. "We're done. Don't bother coming home. You've made your choice." As he walked away, he caught snippets of their panicked conversation. Steve, spitting blood. "This wasn't part of the plan. We need those files." Lana, hissing back. "Shut up, you idiot. He might hear you." Howard's mind whirred into overdrive. Files? Plan? The betrayal ran deeper than he'd imagined. This wasn't just about a failing marriage. This was about his life's work. The next morning found Howard in a private conference room at Quantum Innovations. Across from him sat Frank Harper, the company's legal counsel and Howard's oldest friend. Frank's face was a mask of concern. "Howard, I'm sorry about Lana," Frank began, his voice gruff with emotion. "But something doesn't add up here. Lana's actions, they seem too calculated." Howard nodded, sharing his suspicions about the overheard conversation. As they delved into the intricacies of divorce proceedings, Howard's phone buzzed. An unknown number flashed on the screen, followed by a text message that made his blood run cold. "Back off, or everything you've built will come crashing down." Frank's expression darkened as Howard showed him the message. "Howard, I think we're dealing with something much bigger than infidelity here." "Agreed," Howard said, his voice grim. He revealed the final piece of the puzzle, the emptied safe, the missing documents. "They're after Quantum, Frank. This goes beyond Lana and Steve. Someone's pulling their strings." Frank leaned back, fingers steepled in thought. We need to move carefully. If word of this gets out, the shareholders will panic. We could be looking at a hostile takeover. Howard's eyes hardened. He'd built Quantum from the ground up, turning a garage startup into a tech giant. He'd be damned if he'd let anyone take it from him. We fight, he said, voice low and dangerous. We find out who's behind this and we bury them. Frank nodded, a grim smile playing at the corners of his mouth. This was the Howard he knew, ruthless, determined, unstoppable when his back was against the wall. Where do we start? Frank asked, already reaching for his legal pad. Howard's mind raced, connections forming and plans taking shape. We need to secure the company first. Lock down all sensitive projects, change access codes. Then we follow the money. Lana's been acting strange for months. There must be a paper trail. As they strategized, Howard felt a familiar fire igniting in his chest. This wasn't just about saving his marriage or his reputation anymore. This was war, and Howard Steele didn't lose wars. One more thing, Howard said, his voice cold as a Siberian winter. I want them to suffer, Frank. Lana, Steve, whoever's pulling their strings. I want them to regret the day they crossed me. Frank nodded, no judgment in his eyes. He'd known Howard long enough to understand. This wasn't about vengeance. This was justice, served Steele style. As they delved deeper into their plans, neither man noticed a small device blinking silently under the conference table. Someone was listening, and the game was far from over. Howard Steele's office was a fortress of glass and steel, much like the man himself. He sat behind his imposing desk, fingers steepled, as he faced Ruby Winters. The private investigator's reputation preceded her, discreet, thorough, and utterly ruthless. Just the kind of ally Howard needed in this war. I need everything on Steve Shelton and my soon-to-be ex-wife, Lana, Howard said, his voice as cold and sharp as a scalpel. Leave no stone unturned. Ruby nodded, her eyes glinting with professional interest. Consider it done, Mr. Steele. Anything specific you're looking for? Anything that doesn't add up, Howard replied. I have a feeling this goes deeper than a simple affair. As Ruby left to begin her investigation, Howard turned his attention to the financial reports spread across his desk. The numbers blurred before his eyes, his mind replaying the events of the past few days. The betrayal, Simon's injuries, the confrontation with Lana and Steve. Each memory stoked the cold fury burning in his chest. A knock at the door interrupted his dark musings. Lawrence Stanley, Howard's business partner and COO of Quantum Innovations, entered with a grim expression. Howard, we need to talk, Lawrence said, his normally jovial face etched with concern. There are some financial discrepancies I can't explain. Howard's eyes narrowed. Show me. As Lawrence laid out the troubling figures, Howard's suspicions crystallized into certainty. This wasn't just about Lana's infidelity. This was corporate espionage, a coordinated attack on everything he'd built. Lock it down, Howard ordered, his voice leaving no room for argument. Change all access codes. Restrict information flow. I want to know every person who's accessed our systems in the last 6 months. Lawrence nodded, already reaching for his phone. What about the board? They'll want answers. They'll get them when I'm ready, Howard replied. For now, this stays between us. As Lawrence left to implement the security measures, Howard's phone buzzed. A text from Ruby. Found something. Meet me at your house. Alone. The drive home was a blur of strategic planning and barely contained rage. Howard pulled into his driveway, noting the unfamiliar car parked across the street. Ruby's, no doubt. He found her in his home office, her expression grim. You're not going to like this, Mr. Steele. I already don't like any of this, Howard retorted. What did you find? Ruby held up a tiny device, no larger than a button. This was hidden in your desk lamp. High-end stuff, live audio feed. There are probably more scattered throughout the house. Howard's blood ran cold, then hot with fury. They'd been watching him, listening to his every move. In his own home. There's more, Ruby continued. Steve Shelton? He's got priors for fraud, suspected ties to organized crime. And your wife. She's been making large cash withdrawals from your joint account for months, you might know that. Hundreds of thousands of dollars. Howard's mind raced, connecting the dots. The missing documents from his safe, the financial discrepancies at Quantum, the surveillance. This was no impulsive affair. This was a calculated attack. What about Simon? Howard asked, a rare note of concern creeping into his voice. Ruby's expression softened slightly. Your son's clean, far as I can tell, but he might know more than he's letting on. Kids notice things, even if they don't understand what they're seeing. Howard nodded, already formulating his next move. Keep digging. I want to know every skeleton in their closets, every dirty secret, and sweep the house for more bugs. As Ruby left to continue her investigation, Howard sank into his office chair. The leather creaked, a familiar sound in a world that had suddenly become alien and hostile. His phone buzzed again. Another text from the unknown number. Tick-tock, Howard. How much are you willing to lose? Howard's grip tightened on the phone, his knuckles white. They thought they had him cornered, outmaneuvered. They had no idea who they were dealing with. A knock at the door startled him from his thoughts. Simon stood in the doorway, his broken arm in a sling, his face a mask of guilt and fear. Dad, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I think I knew something was wrong with Mom. I should have said something sooner. Howard's expression softened, just a fraction. Komein, son, tell me everything. As Simon poured out his observations. Hushed phone calls, mysterious meetings, Lana's sudden interest in Howard's work projects. Howard felt a grim satisfaction. His son was observant, sharp, a true steel. You did the right thing by telling me now, Howard said, squeezing Simon's uninjured shoulder. We'll handle this. Together. Simon nodded, some of the tension leaving his frame. He trusted his father implicitly, knew that Howard Steele was a force to be reckoned with. As Simon left, Howard's resolve hardened. Lana and Steve had made a critical error. They'd threatened not just his business, but his family, and Howard Steele protected what was his. He picked up his phone, dialing Lawrence. Meet me at the office. It's time to go on the offensive. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Howard and Lawrence worked tirelessly, setting up firewalls, tracking data access, laying traps for their unseen enemies. Ruby's investigation continued to uncover layers of deception and betrayal. It was late one night when everything came to a head. Howard was driving home, his mind churning with plans and countermoves, when he noticed something off about his car's handling. The brakes felt spongy, unresponsive. With a surge of adrenaline, Howard realized what was happening. He'd driven this road 1,000 times, knew every curve and dip. He managed to guide the car off the road, narrowly avoiding a catastrophic crash. As he stood by the roadside, waiting for a tow truck, Howard's phone buzzed. The unknown number again. Next time, you won't be so lucky. A cold smile spread across Howard's face. They'd just made their final mistake. Now, it was his turn to strike. The next morning found Howard in his office, facing Lawrence and Ruby. The atmosphere was tense, charged with anticipation. They tried to kill me last night, Howard said without preamble. Tampered with my brakes. Lawrence's face paled, but Ruby merely nodded, as if confirming a suspicion. So, what's our play? Lawrence asked, his voice steady despite the shock. Howard's eyes glinted with a predatory light. We set a trap, feed them false information about a major deal, something too tempting to resist. Ruby leaned forward, intrigued. What kind of deal? A merger, Howard replied. One that would triple Quantum's value overnight. The kind of inside information that could make someone very, very rich. They'll definitely come to steal, and we'll catch them red-handed. As they hammered out the details of their plan, Howard felt a familiar rush of adrenaline. The game was entering its final stages, and he intended to emerge victorious. Lana, Steve, and whoever was pulling their strings had no idea what they'd unleashed. Howard Steele was coming for them, and he would show no mercy. Howard Steele's office hummed with tension, the air thick with anticipation. He stood at the window, gazing out at the city skyline, a predatory gleam in his eyes. Behind him, Lawrence and Ruby waited, their faces grim with determination. "It's time," Howard said, turning to face his allies. "Let's spring the trap." The plan was elegant in its simplicity. They had leaked information about a major cash transaction happening at Howard's house. Bait too tempting for Lana and Steve to resist. Now, all that remained was to wait. As night fell, Howard's expansive home transformed into a high-tech command center. Hidden cameras covered every angle. Microphones picked up the slightest whisper. In a room upstairs, Lawrence monitored the feeds, ready to signal at the first sign of intrusion. Howard paced the living room, every muscle coiled tight. This was more than just catching thieves. This was about retribution, about making Lana and Steve pay for their betrayal. A soft beep from Howard's earpiece broke the silence. Lawrence's voice came through, tense but controlled. Movement at the back gate. 2 figures approaching the house. Howard's lips curled into a cold smile. Right on schedule. He moved silently through the darkened house, positioning himself in the shadows of his study. Minutes ticked by, each second stretching into eternity. Then, a soft click, the unmistakable sound of a lock being picked. Howard's hand tightened on the grip of the firearm concealed in his jacket, not out of fear, but anticipation. The study door eased open. 2 silhouettes slipped inside, one tall and bulky, the other slender and graceful. Steve and Lana, moving with the practiced ease of experienced burglars. Howard waited, letting them move deeper into the room. He saw Steve head for the safe hidden behind a painting, while Lana made straight for the computer. "Looking for something?" Howard's voice cut through the darkness like a whip crack. The intruders froze. In one fluid motion, Howard flicked on the lights and leveled his firearm at them. Lana's face drained of color. "Howard, please." "Save it," Howard snarled. "I know everything. Your plans, the embezzlement, the frame job you had planned. Did you really think you could outsmart me?" Steve, his face still bruised from their last encounter, lunged for something in his jacket. Howard's finger tightened on the trigger, but before he could fire, another figure burst into the room. "Don't move." Simon's voice rang out, strong and clear. Howard allowed himself a moment of pride. His son stood tall, his own firearm trained steadily on Steve. The cast on his arm was gone. It had never been real, just another part of their elaborate ruse. Steve's eyes darted between father and son, realizing he was outmatched. Slowly, he raised his hands. Lana, her composure cracking, turned to Simon. "Baby, please. You don't understand." "I understand perfectly." Simon cut her off, his voice cold. "I understood when I caught you with Steve. I understood when you helped him lock me in that room. And I understand now, watching you try to steal from us." The look of betrayal on Lana's face was almost comical. She had never suspected that her son, the one she thought she had fooled, had been playing her all along. Howard stepped forward, his firearm never wavering. "It's over. The police are on their way. But before they get here, I want answers. Who are you working for?" Steve's face twisted into a sneer. "You think this ends with us? We're just the tip of the iceberg, Steele. There are people out there who want to see you burn, and they won't stop." His words cut off in a gasp as Simon, moving with lightning speed, drove his fist into Steve's stomach. "Answer the question," Simon growled. But before Steve could speak, Lana made her move. With a desperate cry, she lunged for Howard's firearm. Time seemed to slow. Howard saw the wild look in Lana's eyes, saw her fingers reaching for the weapon. In that split second, he made his choice. The shot echoed through the room like a thunderclap. Lana stumbled back, clutching her shoulder. Blood seeped between her fingers, staining her designer blouse crimson. Dad! Simon's voice was sharp with shock. Howard's face was a mask of cold fury. She made her choice. The sound of sirens filled the air, growing louder by the second. Steve, seeing his last chance slipping away, made a desperate grab for Lana's purse. But Simon was faster, tackling him to the ground just as the police burst through the door. What followed was a blur of activity. Paramedics tending to Lana, police securing Steve, detectives taking statements. Through it all, Howard stood like a rock, his eyes never leaving Lana and Steve as they were led away in handcuffs. As the chaos subsided, Simon approached his father. "It's really over?" Howard nodded, allowing himself to relax for the first time in weeks. "It's over. You did good, son." Simon's smile was tinged with sadness. I wish it hadn't come to this." Howard placed a hand on his son's shoulder, his grip firm and reassuring. They made their choices. Now they faced the consequences. As dawn broke over the city, Howard stood in his study, surveying the aftermath of the night's events. Lawrence and Ruby joined him, their faces showing a mixture of relief and grim satisfaction. "The board's going to want answers," Lawrence said. Howard nodded. "They'll get them. Every dirty detail. It's time to clean house, root out any other moles in the company." Ruby handed him a thick file. "This should help. Everything I uncovered about their operation, including some names you'll want to look into." Howard took the file, his mind already racing with plans. This wasn't just about saving his company anymore. This was about sending a message. No one crossed Howard Steele and got away with it. Months passed. The trial was a media sensation. Every sordid detail splashed across headlines. Howard took the stand, his testimony a masterclass in controlled fury. He laid out the extent of Lana and Steve's betrayal, backed by mountains of evidence. As the verdict was read guilty on all counts, Howard felt no joy, no satisfaction, only a grim sense of justice served. In the aftermath, quantum innovations emerged stronger than ever. The board, impressed by Howard's handling of the crisis, granted him even more control. New security measures were implemented, turning the company into a digital fortress. Simon, having proven his mettle, took on a larger role in the company. Father and son worked side by side, rebuilding what had been threatened, creating something even more powerful. One evening, as they stood in Howard's office overlooking the city, Simon turned to his father. "Do you ever regret how things turned out? With Mom, I mean." Howard's gaze remained fixed on the skyline, his expression unreadable. "Regret is a luxury we can't afford, Simon. She made her choices. We made ours. All that matters now is moving forward." Simon nodded, understanding the harsh truth in his father's words. They had weathered a storm of betrayal and corporate intrigue, emerging not just victorious, but stronger. The Steele legacy would continue, forged in fire, tempered by adversity. As night fell over the city, Howard Steele allowed himself a small smile. He had faced down his enemies, protected what was his, and come out on top. And if anyone else dared to challenge him, well, they would learn the hard way that crossing Howard Steele was a mistake they would regret for the rest of their lives. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comment section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there. Help us reach 1,000 subscribers on our new channel, Cheating Tales Lab. We hope you enjoy this story. Let's begin. Spencer Durham woke up at 5 a.m., as he always did. He reached for his phone, his fingers tapping out his passcode by muscle memory. He had a text from his wife, Kristen. "Miss you, babe. Can't wait to see you tonight." Spencer smiled. After 12 years of marriage, Kristen still made his heart skip a beat. He typed out a quick reply, then headed for the shower. As the hot water cascaded over his body, he thought about surprising Kristen with dinner reservations at Le Petit Bistro, her favorite French restaurant. The day flew by in a blur of meetings and conference calls. Spencer's company, Durham Tech, was on the verge of a breakthrough in quantum computing. If successful, it would revolutionize the tech industry and solidify Durham Tech's position as a market leader. As he drove home, Spencer's mind drifted to the future. He and Kristen had been talking about starting a family. Maybe tonight would be the night they'd decide to try. He pulled into the driveway of their craftsman-style home, noticing with surprise that Kristen's car was already there. She usually worked late on Thursdays. Spencer entered quietly, intending to surprise her. He heard Kristen's voice coming from the study, laughter in her tone. She must be on the phone. "I can't wait to see you either," Kristen was saying. "Spencer's out of town until tomorrow. We'll have the whole night to ourselves." Spencer froze, his hand on the doorknob. This couldn't be happening. There had to be some explanation. "I've got something special planned," Kristen continued, her voice dropping to a sultry whisper. "Remember that little red number you like so much?" Spencer's vision blurred. He pushed open the door, startling Kristen. She whirled around, her face draining of color as she saw him. "Spencer," she gasped, "you're home early." Spencer's voice was ice. "Clearly." Kristen's eyes darted to her phone, then back to Spencer. "It's not what you think." "Really?" Spencer's laugh was bitter. "Because I think you're planning to fuck someone else in our bed tonight." Kristen's demeanor changed, defiance replacing shock. "Fine. You want the truth? I'm going on a date tonight, with someone who actually pays attention to me." Spencer felt like he'd been punched in the gut. "What are you talking about? We'd been married for 12 years. Kristen's laugh was cruel. "And for the last 5, you've been married to your company. I'm done playing second fiddle to Durham Tech. So, instead of talking to me, you decide to cheat?" "Oh, grow up, Spencer," Kristen sneered. "This isn't some fairy tale. People change. Feelings change. I've changed." Spencer struggled to process what was happening. "Who is he?" Kristen's smile was vicious. "Someone who knows how to treat a woman. Someone who isn't afraid of success." The implication hit Spencer like a physical blow. "It's Scott Cahill, isn't it? My competitor?" Kristen's silence was answer enough. Spencer's mind raced. Scott Cahill, CEO of Cahill Tech, had been making aggressive moves in the market lately. And now this. How long? Kristen shrugged. "Long enough to know he's a better man than you'll ever be." "Get out," Spencer said, his voice deadly quiet. "Gladly," Kristen replied. "Oh, and Spencer? I'll be taking half of everything in the divorce. Enjoy your precious company while you still have it." She brushed past him, the scent of her perfume, the perfume he'd bought her for their anniversary, making his stomach turn. Spencer stood in the empty study, feeling as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. He needed air. He needed space. He needed revenge. He stumbled out of the house, barely aware of where he was going. His feet carried him to the park where he and Kristen had their first date. He collapsed onto a bench, his mind reeling. How had he not seen this coming? Had he really been so blind, so focused on his work that he'd driven Kristen into another man's arms? No. Spencer's jaw clenched. This wasn't his fault. Kristen had made a choice. She could have talked to him, could have told him she was unhappy. Instead, she'd chosen to betray him in the worst possible way. And with Scott Cahill, of all people, the man who'd been trying to undermine Durham Tech at every turn. Was this just about hurting Spencer, or was there more to it? Spencer pulled out his phone, his fingers shaking slightly as he dialed a number. "Ricardo? It's Spencer Durham. I need your services." Discreetly. Ricardo Finn was the best private investigator in the city. If anyone could get to the bottom of this, it was him. "I'll text you the details," Spencer said. "I want to know everything. Who, what, when, where. And I want to know what, if anything, this has to do with my company." He ended the call, feeling a cold determination settle over him. Kristen thought she could take half of everything. She had no idea what was coming. Spencer spent the next week in a haze of work and sleepless nights. He threw himself into Durham Tech, pushing the quantum computing project forward with a ferocity that both impressed and worried his team. Kristen tried to call several times. Spencer let it go to voicemail. She could wait until he had all the facts. Finally, Ricardo called. "I have what you need," he said. "My office." 1 hour. Spencer arrived at Ricardo's office exactly 60 minutes later. The PI's office was dim, the blinds drawn against the afternoon sun. Ricardo gestured for Spencer to sit. "It's not good," he said without preamble. Spencer's stomach clenched. "Tell me." Ricardo slid a folder across the desk. "Kristen's been having an affair with Scott Cahill for the past 8 months. Spencer opened the folder. Inside were surveillance photos showing Kristen entering Scott's office building late at night, leaving early in the morning, her hair mussed, wearing the same clothes as the night before. "There's more," Ricardo said. He pushed another folder toward Spencer. Financial records. Large sums of money being transferred from Kristen's personal account to offshore holdings linked to Scott. Spencer's mind raced. The timing coincided with several unexplained leaks of sensitive information from Durham Tech, information that had given Cahill Tech a significant advantage in recent months. "She's been selling me out," Spencer said, his voice hollow. Ricardo nodded. "It looks that way." Spencer leaned back in his chair, his mind whirling. This wasn't just about an affair. This was corporate espionage. This was an attempt to destroy everything he built. "What do you want to do?" Ricardo asked. Spencer's eyes hardened. "I want to destroy them both." Ricardo raised an eyebrow. "That could get messy." "I don't care," Spencer said. "They try to take everything from me. Now I'm going to take everything from them." Ricardo nodded slowly. "I'll need more time, more resources." "You'll have whatever you need," Spencer said. "I want every skeleton in their closets, every dirty secret, every weakness." As he left Ricardo's office, Spencer felt a strange calm settle over him. The pain and betrayal were still there, but they were overshadowed by a cold, implacable anger. Kristen and Scott thought they could play him for a fool. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. Spencer's first stop was Durham Tech. He needed to secure his company against further attacks. He called an emergency meeting with his most trusted employee and friend, Danny Donnelly, the CFO. "We've been compromised," Spencer said without preamble as Danny entered his office. Danny's eyes widened. "How bad?" "Bad," Spencer replied. He filled Danny in on Kristen's betrayal and the corporate espionage. Danny whistled low. "Jesus, Spence. I'm so sorry." Spencer waved away the sympathy. "I need your help, Danny. We need to protect the company." Danny nodded. "All business now. What do you need?" "I want to create a series of shell companies," Spencer said. "We'll use them to obscure ownership of our key patents and technologies." Danny frowned. "That's risky, Spence. If the SEC gets wind of it, it's riskier to do nothing." Spencer cut him off. "Cahill Tech is coming for us. We need to be prepared." Danny nodded slowly. "Okay, what else?" "I want to transfer a significant portion of our liquid assets to secure offshore accounts," Spencer continued. "And we need new security protocols. Nothing leaves this building without triple verification." Danny's eyebrows shot up. "You're really going to war, aren't you?" Spencer's smile was grim. "They started this war, Danny. I'm just making sure we finish it." As Danny left to set things in motion, Spencer turned to his computer. He had one more card to play. He pulled up his email and composed a message to Abby, Kristen's estranged sister. They hadn't spoken in years. Not since Kristen had manipulated their father into cutting Abby out of his will. "Abby," he wrote, "I know it's been a long time, and I'm sorry to reach out like this, but I need to talk to you. It's about Kristen. Please meet me at the Bluebird Cafe tomorrow at 2 p.m. I'll explain everything." He hit send, then leaned back in his chair. Abby was a wild card, but if she was willing to help, she could be a powerful ally. The next day, Spencer arrived at the Bluebird Cafe early. He chose a quiet booth in the back, his eyes on the door. Abby walked in at exactly 2 p.m. Her eyes scanned the cafe, landing on Spencer. She hesitated for a moment, then walked over. "Spencer," she said, sliding into the booth. "It's been a while." Spencer nodded. "Thank you for coming, Abby." Abby's eyes narrowed. "What's this about, Spencer? Your message was pretty cryptic." Spencer took a deep breath. "It's about Kristen. She's been having an affair." Abby's eyebrows shot up. "Wow. Can't say I'm entirely surprised. Who's the guy?" "Scott Cahill, my main competitor." Abby let out a low whistle. Damn, Kristen always didn't know how to pick him. Spencer leaned forward. "There's more. She's been feeding him information about my company, helping him try to take me down." Abby's face hardened. "That bitch," she muttered, "always looking out for number one." "I need your help, Abby," Spencer said. "I need to know everything about Kristen's past, everything she's tried to hide." Abby studied him for a long moment. "You're going to war with her, aren't you?" Spencer nodded. "She tried to destroy everything I built. I'm not going to let her get away with it." A slow smile spread across Abby's face. Well, looks like my dear sister has finally bitten off more than she can chew." She leaned forward. "All right, Spencer. I'm in. What do you want to know?" For the next hour, Abby filled Spencer in on Kristen's past. The college professor she'd seduced for better grades. The first boss she'd manipulated into giving her promotions. The string of wealthy boyfriends she'd used and discarded. Kristen's always been good at using people, Abby concluded. But she's never faced anyone willing to fight back. Until now. Spencer nodded slowly. "Thank you, Abby. This helps more than you know." As they parted ways, Abby caught Spencer's arm. "Make her pay, Spencer. For both of us." Spencer's smile was cold. "Oh, I intend to." As he walked back to his car, Spencer's mind was racing. He had the pieces now. The shell companies to protect Durham Tech. The offshore accounts to secure his assets. And now, thanks to Abby, a clearer picture of who he was really dealing with. Kristen thought she was so clever. She thought she could manipulate him, use him, and then discard him when something better came along. She was about to learn just how wrong she was. Spencer pulled out his phone and dialed Ricardo. "I've got more information," he said when the PI answered. "I want to move to the next phase. It's time to start applying pressure." Ricardo asked, "This might get messy." Spencer's voice was steel. "They want a war? Let's give them one." As he hung up, Spencer felt a cold satisfaction settle over him. Kristen and Scott had no idea what was coming, but they were about to find out. The game was on, and Spencer intended to win, no matter the cost. Spencer Durham stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office, watching the city below. 2 weeks had passed since his meeting with Abby. 2 weeks of meticulous planning, of setting the stage for what was to come. His phone buzzed. A text from Ricardo. "It's happening. Cahill Tech just made their move." Spencer allowed himself a cold smile. Right on schedule. He turned to his computer, pulling up the live stock ticker. Cahill Tech was aggressively buying up Durham Tech stock, causing a stir in the tech world. Message boards were lighting up with speculation. The financial news networks were already running breaking news banners. Spencer picked up his phone, dialing Danny. "It's time," he said when the CFO answered. "Release the reports." Within the hour, Durham Tech released a series of financial reports that painted a bleak picture of the company's future. Projected earnings were down. R&D costs were up. The quantum computing project was facing unforeseen obstacles. The effect was immediate. Durham Tech's stock price began to fall. Spencer watched the numbers tick down, feeling a satisfaction. He could almost picture Scott Cahill's face, the smug bastard thinking he had Spencer on the ropes. His phone rang again. This time, it was John Turner, the mole Spencer had planted in Cahill Tech's upper management. "Scott's calling an emergency board meeting," John reported. "He's pushing hard for this takeover." "Good," Spencer said. Keep feeding him the information we discussed. Make him think he's got us cornered. As he hung up, Spencer allowed himself a moment of reflection. He thought of Kristen, wondered if she was watching this unfold. Did she feel a twinge of regret? Or was she too busy planning how to spend her half of KO-Tekka's soon-to-be inflated stock value? The thought hardened his resolve. He picked up his phone again, this time calling his PR team. "Start the rumor mill," he instructed. "I want whispers about a revolutionary new product in every tech blog and forum by end of day." The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Spencer barely slept, subsisting on coffee and pure adrenaline. He watched as Scott Kale pushed forward with his takeover bid, growing more desperate with each passing hour. Durham Tekka's stock continued to fall, but not as sharply as it should have given the dire financial reports. The rumors of a game-changing new product were doing their job, creating just enough uncertainty to keep investors from completely jumping ship. On the fourth day, Spencer received another call from John. "Scott's getting paranoid," John reported. "He suspects there's a leak. He's having IT go through everyone's emails and phone records." Spencer smiled. "Good. Keep your head down. We're almost there." That afternoon, Spencer called a meeting of Durham Tekka's board and key investors. The conference room was tense, filled with worried faces and whispered conversations. Spencer stood at the head of the table, surveying the room. These were the people who had believed in him, who had helped build Durham Tech from the ground up. He owed them the truth. "I know you're all concerned," he began. "The past few days have been challenging, to say the least." He paused, making eye contact with each person in the room. "But I'm here to tell you that everything is going according to plan." A murmur ran through the room. Spencer held up a hand for silence. KO-Tekka's takeover attempt was anticipated. In fact, we've been preparing for it for weeks. The financial reports, the stock devaluation, it's all part of a larger strategy. He clicked a button on his laptop, and a series of graphs appeared on the screen behind him. "What you're looking at is the real state of Durham Tech. Our quantum computing project isn't failing. It's weeks ahead of schedule. Our projected earnings? They're conservative estimates at best." The mood in the room began to shift from anxiety to cautious optimism. "I've called you here today because I need your trust," Spencer continued. "What I'm about to share cannot leave this room. But I promise you, if you stand with me now, Durham Tech will not only survive this attack, we'll emerge stronger than ever." For the next hour, Spencer laid out his plan in detail. By the time he finished, the room was buzzing with excitement. The board members and investors left with renewed confidence, ready. His blood ran cold. Sitting at the table, looking intimate and carefree, were Kristen and Scott Kale. Spencer's hands clenched into fists. "Their anniversary," he growled. Ricardo nodded. "Thought you want to know." Spencer's mind raced. Part of him wanted to march over there, to confront them, to wipe those smug smiles off their faces. But no, that wasn't the plan. He needed to be smarter than that. He pulled out his phone, dialing Abby's number. "How fast can you get to Lucille?" he asked when she answered. "And how do you feel about creating a scene?" 30 minutes later, Spencer and Abby walked into Lucille arm in arm. They were both dressed impeccably. Spencer in a tailored suit that accentuated his athletic build, Abby in a stunning red dress that turned heads as they passed. They secured a table with a clear view of Kristen and Scott, then settled in to wait. As the main course arrived, Spencer and Abby made their move. They stood up, making their way towards Kristen and Scott's table, as if heading to the restrooms. Kristen saw them first. Her eyes widened in shock, the wine glass slipping from her hand and shattering on the floor. Scott turned to see what had startled Kristen, his face paling as he recognized Spencer. "Well, well," Spencer said, his voice carrying in the sudden hush that had fallen over the restaurant. "Isn't this cozy?" Kristen recovered first. "Spencer," she hissed, "what are you doing here?" "Having dinner," Spencer replied casually, "with my date." He gestured to Abby, who smiled sweetly. "Your date?" Kristen's voice was strangled. "But that's my sister." Scott stood up. trying to defuse the situation. "Look, Spencer, I know this looks bad, but bad." Spencer laughed, the sound cold and mirthless. "No, Scott. Bad was when you tried to steal my company's secrets. Bad was when you launched a hostile takeover of my life's work." He leaned in close, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. This is just the beginning." Kristen's face was a mask of fury. "How dare you," she spat. "You show up here with my own sister? You're nothing but a—" "Careful, Kristen." Abby cut in, her voice honey-sweet. "You might not want to finish that sentence. Not when there are so many important people around to hear it." For the first time, Kristen and Scott seemed to realize they had an audience. Several tables around them were occupied by some of the city's most influential tech executives and journalists, all watching the scene unfold with rapt attention. Spencer smiled, a predator's grin. "You two enjoy your dinner," he said. "I'm sure you have a lot to talk about." As he and Abby turned to leave, Spencer paused, looking back at Scott. "Oh, and Scott, you might want to double-check those Durham Tech financials. I have a feeling there might be some discrepancies." They walked away, leaving Kristen and Scott staring after them in stunned silence. As they reached their table, Abby let out a low whistle. "That was intense," she said. "You okay?" Spencer took a deep breath, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. "Yeah," he said. "I'm better than okay. I'm just getting started." They raised their glasses in a quiet toast, both knowing that the real battle was only beginning. A week after the restaurant incident, Kristen paced nervously in a private room at Scott's club. The past 7 days had been a nightmare. Their carefully constructed plans were unraveling at an alarming rate. The door opened and Scott walked in. He looked haggard, his usual polished appearance marred by dark circles under his eyes and a day's worth of stubble. "This is a disaster," Kristen hissed as soon as the door closed behind him. "Spencer's 3 steps ahead of us at every turn. How did this happen?" Scott ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "I don't know," he admitted, "but we need to do something drastic. Now." He reached into his briefcase, pulling out a thick folder. "I've had my team working around the clock. We've fabricated evidence of tax evasion and illegal offshore accounts in Spencer's name." Kristen's eyes widened. "Is that enough?" Scott nodded. "It's enough to ruin him, to force him to step down from Durham Tech to avoid prosecution." Kristen felt a flicker of hope for the first time in days. "And the divorce? If he steps down, agrees to hand over control of Durham Tech, we can offer him a quiet divorce. No scandal, no dragging his name through the mud." Kristen nodded slowly. "Do it. Set up a meeting." 2 days later, Spencer walked into a conference room at the Ritz-Carlton. Kristen and Scott were already there, looking tense but determined. "Spencer," Scott began as soon as he sat down, "we have a proposition for you." Spencer leaned back in his chair, his face impassive. "I'm listening." Scott slid the folder across the table. "We have evidence of some financial irregularities on your part. Tax evasion, illegal offshore accounts, the kind of thing that could land you in federal prison." Spencer didn't even glance at the folder. "Is that so?" Kristen leaned forward. "We're willing to make this all go away, Spencer. All you have to do is step down from Durham Tech, hand over control to Scott. And in return," Spencer's voice was eerily calm, "a quiet divorce," Kristen said. "No scandal, no mudslinging. You walk away with your reputation intact." Spencer was silent for a long moment. Then, to Kristen and Scott's surprise, he smiled. "That's a very interesting offer," he said. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out a small device. "But I have a counterproposal." He pressed a button on the device, and suddenly the room was filled with Kristen and Scott's voices, discussing their plans to blackmail Spencer. The color drained from their faces as they realized what was happening. "You see," Spencer continued, his voice hardening, "I've been recording our conversations for quite some time now. I have evidence of your affair, your corporate espionage, and now your attempt at blackmail." He stood up, looming over the table. So here's my offer. You both resign from KL Tech immediately. You admit to your shareholders that you attempted a hostile takeover based on stolen information. And Kristen, you agree to a divorce settlement on my terms. Kristen and Scott stared at him in shocked silence. Or, Spencer continued, I can take this recording, along with all the other evidence I've collected, to the FBI. I'm sure they'd be very interested in hearing about your activities. The united front between Kristen and Scott crumbled instantly. You manipulated me. Kristen shrieked at Scott. You said this was foolproof. Scott's face twisted with anger. Me? You're the one who came to me in the first place, looking for a way to secure your financial future, remember? As they turned on each other, Spencer calmly gathered his things and walked to the door. He paused, looking back at the bickering couple. I'll give you 24 hours to make your decision, he said. Choose wisely. As the door closed behind him, Spencer allowed himself a small smile. The game was over, and he had won. Scott Cahill paced his office like a caged animal, his usually immaculate appearance in disarray. His tie hung loose around his neck, and his shirt was rumpled from hours of frantic work. The past few weeks had been a nightmare, each of his carefully laid plans crumbling to dust. He grabbed his phone, dialing Kristen's number for the 5th time that day. Straight to voicemail. Again. Damn it, Kristen, he snarled, hurling the phone across the room. It hit the wall with a satisfying crack. A tentative knock at the door interrupted his brooding. Mr. Cahill, his assistant's voice was hesitant. The board is waiting for you in the conference room. Scott took a deep breath, straightening his tie and smoothing down his hair. He couldn't let them see him like this. He had to be in control. He had to have a plan. As he strode into the conference room, the tension was palpable. The board members sat in stony silence, their faces grim. Gentlemen, Scott began, summoning every ounce of charm and confidence he possessed. I know the past few weeks have been challenging, but I assure you, KL Tech is stronger than ever. Our takeover of Durham Tech is proceeding as planned. The lead board member, a stern-faced man named Harrison, leaned forward. Is that so, Scott? Because from where we're sitting, it looks like we're hemorrhaging money and credibility by the hour. Scott opened his mouth to respond, but Harrison cut him off. Save it. We've heard enough of your assurances. What we need now are results. You have 48 hours to turn this around, or we're pulling the plug on the takeover and reevaluating your position as CEO. The words hit Scott like a physical blow. He nodded stiffly, then turned and left the room without another word. Back in his office, Scott's mind raced. He needed a win, and he needed it now. His eyes fell on a file folder on his desk, one he'd been saving as a last resort. He picked up his phone, the spare he kept in his desk drawer, and dialed a number he'd sworn he'd never use. It's Cahill, he said when the line connected. I need everything you've got on Spencer Durham, and I mean everything. I don't care how you get it, just get it done. As he hung up, Scott felt a cold sense of calm settle over him. He was all in now. It was do or die. Across town, Spencer Durham sat in his office, a small smile playing on his lips as he watched the latest financial report scroll across his screen. KL Tech's stock was in freefall, and rumors of federal investigations were swirling through the tech world. His phone buzzed. A text from John Turner, his mole in KL Tech. SC making desperate moves. Be ready. Spencer's smile widened. He'd been waiting for this. He picked up his desk phone, dialing a familiar number. Danny, it's time. Release the dossier. Within hours, the tech world was in an uproar. Leaked documents detailing years of corporate espionage and unethical business practices by Scott Cahill and KL Tech were splashed across every major news outlet. Spencer watched from his office as CNBC ran a breaking news banner. KL Tech CEO Scott Cahill implicated in massive corporate scandal. His phone rang. It was Abby. You seeing this? She asked, a note of awe in her voice. Oh, I'm seeing it, Spencer replied, his tone satisfied. "You know he's going to come after you with everything he's got now, right?" Abby's voice held a hint of concern. Spencer's laugh was cold. "Let him try. I'm ready." The next 24 hours were a whirlwind. Cahill Tech's stock plummeted to record lows as investors scrambled to distance themselves from the scandal. Key employees, sensing the sinking ship, began jumping en masse to competitors, many of them to Durham Tech, thanks to carefully placed job offers from John Turner. Scott Cahill watched in horror as his empire crumbled around him. His phone rang constantly, board members demanding explanations, lawyers warning of impending lawsuits, reporters hungry for comments. In a final, desperate move, Scott booked a red-eye flight to the Cayman Islands, where he had a secret bank account with enough money to start a new life. He was halfway to the airport when his car was suddenly surrounded by black SUVs. FBI agents swarmed out, weapons drawn. Scott Cahill, the lead agent, announced as Scott was dragged from his car, "You're under arrest for securities fraud, corporate espionage, and attempted flight to avoid prosecution." As the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, Scott's eyes met those of Spencer Durham, who stood watching from the shadows. Spencer's face was impassive, but his eyes held a glint of cold satisfaction. With Scott Cahill's arrest dominating the headlines, Kristen Durham found herself alone and desperate. Her carefully constructed world was falling apart, and she knew she had one last card to play. She filed for divorce, still clinging to the belief that she could claim half of Spencer's assets. It was her right, after all. She'd been by his side as he built Durham Tech. She deserved her share. The first day of the divorce proceedings dawned bright and clear. Kristen strode into the courtroom, head held high, dressed in her most expensive suit. She faltered slightly when she saw Spencer, looking calm and collected at the defendant's table. Her lawyer, a shark in an Armani suit, stood to make their opening statement. "Your Honor, my client, Mrs. Durham, is entitled to half of all marital assets, including Mr. Durham's shares in Durham Tech. She was a supportive wife who—" "Objection, Your Honor," interrupted a voice from Spencer's table. A tall, imposing woman stood up, Jordan Foley, Spencer's attorney. "Before we proceed, we have evidence that directly contradicts Mrs. Durham's claims." The judge nodded. "Proceed, Miss Foley." What followed was a masterclass in legal evisceration. Jordan presented a mountain of evidence. Surveillance photos of Kristen's affair with Scott Cahill, financial records showing her attempts to hide assets, emails detailing her involvement in corporate espionage against Durham Tech. Kristen felt the blood drain from her face as her carefully constructed narrative crumbled. She turned to her lawyer, who looked equally shell-shocked. "Furthermore, Your Honor," Jordan continued, her voice ringing through the stunned courtroom, "we are countersuing Mrs. Durham for damages caused to Durham Tech through her actions." The judge's gavel came down like a thunderclap. "In light of this evidence, I'm rejecting Mrs. Durham's claim to Durham Tech assets. Moreover, I'm ordering Mrs. Durham to pay damages for her role in corporate espionage. She will retain only her personal belongings and a small alimony, as determined by the court." Kristen stumbled out of the courtroom, her mind reeling. How had it come to this? How had Spencer outmaneuvered her so completely? As she pushed through the crowd of reporters outside the courthouse, she caught sight of Spencer talking quietly with his lawyer. For a moment, their eyes met. Kristen saw no triumph in Spencer's gaze, no gloating, just a cold, implacable resolve that chilled her to her core. She turned away, suddenly understanding the magnitude of her mistake. She had underestimated Spencer, had thought him weak, easily manipulated. Now she was paying the price. Months passed. The tech world slowly recovered from the Cahill Tech scandal, with Durham Tech emerging as a dominant force in the industry. Spencer threw himself into his work, pushing the boundaries of quantum computing and artificial intelligence. One afternoon, as Spencer sat in his office reviewing quarterly reports, his phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. "Mr. Durham?" a hesitant voice said when he answered. "This is Sarah from Pinewood Rehabilitation Center. I'm calling about Kristen Durham. She's asked to speak with you." Spencer's hand tightened on the phone. He hadn't heard from Kristen since the divorce. He knew she'd checked into rehab as part of a plea deal to avoid jail time for her role in the corporate espionage. "What does she want?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. "She says she wants to make amends," Sarah replied. "She's been making good progress in her treatment, and this is part of her recovery process." Spencer was silent for a long moment. Part of him wanted to refuse, to hang up and never think about Kristen again. But another part, a part he thought he'd buried, was curious. "All right," he said finally. "Tell her I'll meet her, but not at the rehab center. There's a cafe called the Blue Door. I'll be there tomorrow at 2 p.m. The next day, Spencer arrived at the Blue Door precisely at 2. He chose a table in the back where they wouldn't be easily overheard. Kristen walked in a few minutes later. Spencer almost didn't recognize her. Gone was the perfectly coiffed hair and designer clothes. This Kristen looked softer somehow, more real. She hesitated when she saw him, then squared her shoulders and walked over. "Spencer," she said softly, "thank you for agreeing to meet me." Spencer nodded, gesturing for her to sit. "You wanted to talk, so talk." Kristen took a deep breath. I owe you an apology. Several. Actually, what I did to you, to us, it was unforgivable." Spencer said nothing, his face impassive. "I've been doing a lot of thinking in rehab," Kristen continued. "A lot of soul-searching. And I realized I was scared. Scared of losing the lifestyle I'd become accustomed to. Scared of being left behind as you became more and more successful." She laughed bitterly. "Pretty ironic, considering I ended up losing everything anyway." "Why are you telling me this, Kristen?" Spencer asked, his voice carefully controlled. "Because I need you to know that I understand now. I understand the pain I caused, the trust one betrayed, and I'm truly, deeply sorry." Kristen's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "I'm not asking for forgiveness, Spencer. I know I don't deserve that. I needed you to know." Spencer was silent for a long moment, studying Kristen's face. He saw genuine remorse there, a far cry from the cold, calculating woman he divorced. "I appreciate you telling me this," he said finally. "I can't forgive you, Kristen. Not now, maybe not ever. But I hope you find peace." Kristen nodded, wiping away a tear. "Thank you, Spencer, for everything." As they stood to leave, Spencer felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He'd carried the anger and betrayal for so long. It had become a part of him. But now, facing Kristen's genuine remorse, he felt something he hadn't expected. Release. They parted ways outside the cafe, likely for the last time. As Spencer watched Kristen walk away, he felt a sense of closure wash over him. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from Abby. "Dinner tonight?" That new Thai place on Fifth. Spencer smiled, feeling lighter than he had in months. He typed out a quick reply. "Sounds perfect. See you at 7. As he walked to his car, Spencer reflected on the journey that had brought him here. He'd faced betrayal, fought against seemingly insurmountable odds, and emerged stronger. And now, as he looked to the future, he felt a spark of excitement. That evening, as Spencer sat across from Abby in the cozy Thai restaurant, he found himself laughing genuinely for the first time in what felt like years. They talked about everything and nothing, work, family, their shared love of obscure sci-fi novels. As he watched Abby's eyes light up while she recounted a funny story about her latest art project, Spencer felt a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the spicy curry in front of him. He realized then that sometimes, from the ashes of betrayal, something new and potentially beautiful could emerge. And for the first time in a long time, Spencer Durham looked to the future with hope.
Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
I'll never forget that Saturday morning when everything began to unravel. One moment we were peacefully asleep, and the next, my wife Kathy was all over me, completely unexpected and unusually assertive. In the 20 years we'd been married, she had never been this aggressive in bed. For the next 20 minutes, it wasn't love we made. It was raw, primal, and intense. When we finished, Both of us were drenched in sweat, blissfully exhausted, completely satisfied. And I suppose that's exactly what she was aiming for, because it was in that vulnerable, post-coital bliss that she dropped her bombshell. Ben, darling, how much do you love me? Now, on any regular day, that question would have made me pause and wonder what was coming next. But in that moment, I was too mellow to dig deep into its meaning. Instead, I simply smiled and held up my left hand. See that wedding ring, babes? She gave a soft, innocent yes as her hands wandered over my chest, adding to my already warm, content mood. Well, sweetheart, I continued, this ring is round and will never break. That's how much I love you, Kathy. Infinitely, like the circle of this ring. It's forever. She leaned in to kiss me, a kiss that hinted round two might be on the horizon. But then she pulled away, breaking the moment. Ben, I need you to think about something really seriously, she said, her tone suddenly serious. And promise me you won't get mad or jump to conclusions about what I'm going to ask. Can you do that? I wasn't alarmed yet, still basking in the afterglow, and without much thought, I nodded and promised. Kathy continued to stroke my chest sensuously as she haltingly pressed on. Ben, some of the girls I work with have talked about their boyfriends and what they can do to them. Honey, these young guys really seem to have the stamina that you no longer seem to have. What I am asking you, Ben, no begging you really. She stopped as if to gather strength, and then just let it spill out. If you really love me as you say, will you allow me to experience an unbridled sexual encounter with another man, just once? I felt myself tense up as the anger began to rise in me, and I terminated this stupid question with all the dignity it deserved, a simple, forceful, no. With that declaration, I abruptly got out of bed to do my yard work. Kathy was nothing if not resourceful, and over the next few days tried various ways to bring up the topic again, even offering me the same option of a night with a younger woman. Each time I simply told her that it was never going to happen and to let it go. A few weeks passed, and I thought that her fixation with her desire for another lover had ended when she got hit with another problem. Kathy's company downsized, and she was let go. Kathy looked for work, but being a 45-year-old secretary in this economy did not yield too many openings. As the weeks passed, I saw my wife falling deeper into depression. When she wasn't actually out looking for work, she was on our computer doing God only knows what. Then the day came when she hit me with her craziness again. I had just come home from work when I encountered her waiting at the door in nothing but a garter belt, stockings, and heels holding a martini. I know I should have been suspicious, as this was so contrary to my wife's normal behavior over the last 20 years, but any logical thought processes I would normally utilize disappeared when I saw her nude. At that point, I simply went with the flow. An hour later, I was exhausted and completely drained. Kathy was like an insatiable beast, and for the first time since she was laid off, I began to think that her being without a job was not without an upside. That is, until she spoiled the moment and laid it on me again. After experiencing what was undoubtedly the greatest sex in our marriage, she headed into the bathroom to clean herself off, and when she returned, I could see something bad was coming, as it was written on her face when she climbed back into our bed to cuddle by my side. Ben, I need to tell you something, and I want your promise that you will not get mad and storm off without discussing this with me completely, all right? I knew in my guts that this was not going to be pleasant, so with reservations, I grudgingly told her I would abide by her request. Kathy snuggled into me and laid her head on my shoulder so she could almost whisper in my ear and began, Ben, do you know how I have felt over the last few weeks? Do you know what it is like to be told you're overqualified for a job when some 20-something who knows half of what you know gets hired because in reality her tits are perkier? I heard her gasp as if she were holding back the tears. Being the compassionate husband, I held her tighter and said softly, No, I don't, Kathy, but you are a beautiful and intelligent woman, and that shows through. I know you will get a job, and it won't be because of your body, it will be on your abilities. You are smart, talented, and a good worker, and you will beat this. Her left arm that had been draped over my chest now seemed to hold me tighter, and she seemed to be on the verge of tears as she went on, Ben, I might have found a job right here in town through a wonderful man who has put me in touch with a friend of his who owns an insurance agency and is looking for a personal assistant. Now I was alert as I pursued this last bit of information. Kathy, what man is this, and how did you come to meet him? Kathy squeezed me again. Ben, I met Roger online at a dating website. I about came off the bed. You met him where? Kathy soothingly pulled me back again and began talking to me in a manner that my mother used years ago when she wanted me to understand something that I was too young to comprehend. Ben, sweetheart, You know I have been going through a rough spot since my layoff, and I needed something to cheer me up, so I put my picture on a website for married women looking for single guys. I did it as a confidence builder, and it worked. I got a lot of hits by men who wanted me for me, and it perked me up a lot. I was shaking my head and trying to keep my anger in check. I can't believe you would do that to me, actually to us. She gently reminded me that being angry would not solve anything, and to let her finish. In the end, I was pacified into hearing her out. Then, through the site I met a man named Roger, and we have been emailing each other. He's a businessman with a lot of contacts, and when I told him I had been laid off, he set me up with an interview tomorrow with his friend. She paused for a moment to gather her thoughts. When she stopped talking, I interjected, "Okay, Kathy, let me recap this scenario and see where it is going to go. First, you have a job interview that you got from posting your picture on a dating site. Second, a meat-chasing a-hole sets you up with a job interview thinking that now that he has done something for you, there is something you can do for him in return. Third, and this really is the wrinkle, I'm supposed to be so happy by all of this that I lay down and allow this jerk to screw my wife as my way of saying thanks too. Fourth, you then promise me that it will be just this once, and that will be the end of it. Do I have it about right, Kathy?" I felt my wife tremble at my outburst and try to pull away, but I held on to her tightly. Kathy started to blabber between her tears. "No, it is not like that at all. Roger is a gentleman, and he never mentioned to my prospective boss where we met. I love you, Ben, but I want to have sex with Roger. I need to feel that I am wanted by someone other than my husband. Can't you see that?" I really couldn't see her point, but nonetheless I tried to calm her down. With flagging hope that I might be able to assuage her longings and restore her reasoning in this matter, I began to stroke her back with my left hand and whisper soothing platitudes like it will be all right and we will get through this. I thought she was calming down when she suddenly spoke out again in a more forceful manner. "You said you loved me. Well, I love you too, but this has nothing to do with any of that." Her voice notched down in timbre as she forcefully continued. "I could have cheated on you, Ben, and done exactly what I planned to do with Roger on the sly, but I won't disrespect you like that. This will be a one-time experience for me, and I will never do it again. Please allow me this, dear husband, and show me how much you really do love me." She paused, but before I could interject, her voice, now utilizing a more placating tone, commenced again. "Darling, try to think of it in this manner. Do you remember last summer when you lent our neighbor your mower when his broke?" I mumbled that I did. "Well, when you got it back, it was just fine. You didn't like the mower less or find that it didn't cut the same after another man had used it. This is just like that, Ben. I will be back after this is over, and you will never know the difference except that I will show you in a much more physical way how much I truly love you too." Listening to her warped logic had really given me an insight into how bad my wife desired to do this, and it angered me on a level that almost frightened me. I knew then that she would see this Roger fellow with or without my approval, so with my anger barely held in check, I just flat out stated, "I see that no matter what I say, you're going to do what you want to do. Consequences be damned. But Kathy, before you do this thoughtless thing, I want to meet this Roger first. Got it?" With those words, she heard what she wanted to hear and became almost giddy as she kissed me and jumped up, dancing naked around our bedroom. I knew that this moment would mark the end of our happy marriage. Finally, she stopped dancing and, still clad only in garter belt and stockings, fairly screamed that she had to email Roger as she flew out of our bedroom to the computer. I couldn't believe how my always conservative wife was now acting like a moonstruck teenager, finding out the captain of the football team wants to date her. I had a lot to think about, and I suddenly felt like an old man as I roused myself from our bed and went in to take a shower. The next few days flew by and lo, and behold, Kathy got the job working for the friend of her soon-to-be lover, Roger. My wife seemed on top of the world when she giddily informed me that the two of them decided that they would go out Friday next and spend the entire night together before she came home on Saturday. I thanked her for the information, and I doubted that she even noted the pain I was in as she so gingerly flaunted her sexual adventure in front of me. Kathy went out of her way to prepare for her date, and during the week bought a new evening gown, new shoes, and all the accessories to go with them, even setting up an appointment at the beauty parlor for a complete makeover for Friday afternoon before Roger arrived to pick her up. I think the thing that hurt me the most was that even when we were dating, she never got this worked up to see me. The one thing that helped me keep my sanity was during that week I too was busy running a few errands and preparing for my meeting with her lover on Friday. The evening finally arrived, and Kathy was as nervous as a bride on her wedding day. When I arrived home from work, I found her busily preparing her overnight bag for her sleepover. I was saddened to see a glow about her that I had never been able to inspire in her, even when we were dating so many years ago. She jubilantly informed me that I should call and order a pizza for myself as she and Roger would be eating at an exclusive new club in town, the Chateau de Rochambeau. I had heard of this restaurant, and from what I could discern you had to have a lot of cash and some great connections to even think about going there. In short, it was where the elite went to eat. Apparently, Roger was well-heeled and had connections. When the doorbell rang, Kathy screamed in panic that he was early and wouldn't be ready for another 20 minutes or so, and I was to keep Roger occupied. Shaking my head in disgust, I opened the door to be greeted by a distinguished-looking man about 4 inches taller than my 5 feet 10 inches and about 40 pounds of muscle thicker. His hair was the perfect mixture of salt and pepper, and his eyes were almost piercing as he checked me out in return. As I stared at this imposing man, he reached his hand out and in a very friendly but powerful voice introduced himself. "Hello, I'm Roger Brown and I am here to pick up Kathy." I took his hand and shook it, thinking this is how Kathy's dad must have felt the first time I came to pick her up. I didn't like the feeling much, but I covered it up as I replied, "Come in. I'm Ben, Kathy's husband. She is running a little slow, but should be ready in about 20 minutes. Can I get you something to drink?" Roger shook his head as he sat in a chair. "No, thank you. What I really wanted was to meet you." I retreated to my chair and, raising my eyebrows, just replied, "That is interesting. Not often does the love interest want to meet the jilted husband. But then again, I have not had too much experience in these matters, have you?" Roger chuckled. "Actually, I have, and that's why I wanted to meet you. At present I have 4 wives that I see on a regular basis. If Kathy and I hit it off like I think, then it will be 5. I guess that the whole idea of an extramarital lover is somewhat of a turn-on for them." I had caught the word regular loud and clear and now knew that Kathy had been planning more than a one-night stand with this guy. Keeping my anger in check, I replied, "Really? That is quite amazing. It is almost unbelievable that there are more screwed-up people out there besides my wife." Roger's facial expression indicated surprise when I answered him. "Let me ask you something, Ben. You are not really on board with this date, are you?" I looked at Roger with a flat, emotionless face and responded, "No, I am not. However, it doesn't really matter anymore at this point, does it? So, tell me, what are the 4 husbands of the wives you're boning like?" Roger flashed me a disarming smile. "Well, first off, I'm not boning them. I like to think that we make love. However, Ben, as you said, some guys are really screwed up. One of the husbands likes his wife to describe to him the smallest details of our dates with emphasis on the lovemaking, which seems to satisfy him. Another likes to just clean his wife out as soon as she comes home. That's why she can never stay overnight with me, as she wants to have fresh leavings for him." Roger stopped for a second to see how I was taking his accounts, but seeing me sitting impassively, he continued on. "The 3rd husband just wants to wait on me and begs me to take his wife every time I go over there. That dude really has serious problems and even creeps me out, but his wife really loves him and so she caters to his whims. The last guy is the one I really feel for. He has a bad ticker and can't have sex anymore, so he allows me to take care of his wife for him. Sometimes I can almost feel the pain he is experiencing as I take his wife out." Roger stopped and looked at me straight in the eyes. "I sense that you are not like any of those husbands, are you, Ben?" For the first time I smiled. "Well, outside of the pain the guy with the bad heart feels when his wife goes out with you, I can't really relate to any of them. No, I am not like any of them. So let me ask you another question. Why do you pursue married women?" Roger was quick to respond. "Actually, Ben, that is an easy question to answer. First, I make a lot of money, and unfortunately so many women will move in on you, just to get a slice of your fortune. Married women don't do that as they already have someone waiting for them at home. Another plus is that they make no demands. They are always willing to put out and they don't complain about it later. Finally, there is no sneaking around. The husbands are all aware and even approve. Besides, it seems like it is always fresh and fun. No, I don't need a gold-digging woman when these married girls are so willing to satisfy my needs for companionship, romance, and sex." Roger looked at me like he was trying to figure me out. "Ben, let me ask you this. If you don't want your wife doing this, why did you give it the green light?" I gave him a deadpan look as I responded, "I really had no choice. Kathy pretty much told me that it was this way, or behind my back. I didn't want to have that happen, so I told that she had to do what she had to do, and she did. However, in the end I am more than confident that it will all work out." A shadow fleetingly crossed Roger's face, as he seemed to comprehend what I had just alluded to. Inching forward in his chair, he pacifyingly said, "Ben, I know that your wife really does love you. She has alluded to it in every one of our emails. If you say the word, I will call it off and leave right now." I felt the pain of this whole dilemma in my chest as I quietly replied, Did you ever wonder if she only wrote that to convince you, or herself? He nodded like he really sympathized with my thinking. I could have really liked this guy under different circumstances, but not tonight. Don't worry about your date. You go ahead and have a good time. As far as I'm concerned, the die is cast, and the deed will be done. Roger apparently did not want to let it drop, and his eyebrow rose up as he pointedly asked, "This night is not going to end well for Kathy, is it? Before you do something that you will regret later, I need you to know that I will never have any emotional demands on your wife, and this is only for the physical aspect. You know that, right?" I blankly looked at him and really took a measure of the man. "You are very perceptive, Roger. No wonder you're such a successful businessman. I understand you only want my wife's body, but you can't take that without taking the soul of this marriage. At this point, I again only wish you an enjoyable night, and let's leave it at that." I believe that Roger did not really know what to say after that, as he sat there looking shamed before he finally said, "I'm sorry, Ben. This is never what I intended." About that time, my wife came waltzing into the room looking like $1,000,000. Her face and attitude was radiant, and her ensemble would send fire into any man's libido. Without hesitation, she went over to Roger, who had stood when she came into the room, and placing her arms around his neck, kissed him long and deep. I felt an anguish and remorse as it occurred to me what a fool I had been for not insisting that Kathy see a therapist when this all started, but it was too late now. When she pulled away from Roger, I could see he was aroused by her sexiness and the intensity of her kiss. Looking at me with a pang of guilt, he quietly said to Kathy, "Baby, why don't you go and kiss your husband goodbye like it's the last kiss he will ever get from you?" She smiled a wicked smile of lust and sexual promises as she withdrew her arms from his neck, and with a sultry sway in her walk, she crossed our living room to me. Kathy put her arms around me and, putting her head close to my ear, whispered, "I know how much you love me, and I thank you for this night. Here is a down payment on account." With that, she kissed me so softly and tenderly that without warning my tears began to fall from my eyes. When she pulled away, I could see the concern on her face as she reassuringly said, "Remember, my dear sweet husband, my love is only for you. While he might use my body tonight, you will have it back tomorrow with none the worse for wear." With those final words, she pulled from me and went to him, taking his hand, and in a throaty voice, pregnant with desire, she spoke, "Well, lover, let's begin our adventure." The two left the room and walked down to Roger's Lexus, where he opened the door for my wife, and the two kissed one more time before Kate got in. Before they were down the street, I placed my wedding band on our dining room table with a note. One of the things I had done in the previous week was to have a jeweler cut through the ring. When that task was done, I had him put an engraving on one side of the cut showing year we were married, with the present year on the other side of the cut. The fact that my wife had never even noticed that I had not been wearing my wedding ring for days clearly spoke volumes about how much she even noticed me anymore. The note I left was simple. "Kathy, when I told you to do what you had to do, it wasn't approval, and it certainly wasn't acceptance. It was simply an acknowledgement of the choice you made. By the time you read this note, I will already be gone. I'm starting over, without you. The house is yours now. I've signed the quitclaim, and most of the savings are yours too. I sincerely hope you find happiness and have a good life." If you're wondering why I had my wedding ring cut, let me explain. Do you remember the day you asked me how much I loved you? Right before this whole mess began? I told you that, like my wedding ring, my love would go on forever. The cut in the ring now represents the end of that love, broken by your betrayal. I had the dates engraved on it to mark the two significant moments, when we started and when we ended. One last thing, tomorrow, you'll be served with divorce papers citing irreconcilable differences. I can't think of anything more fitting. Good luck with your new job. I know you'll excel. Have a wonderful life. Ben. Kathy never thought I'd go through with it. She believed, right up until the papers were served, that I'd come around, that I'd bend like I always did. But not this time. There was no bending, no compromise left in me. When I walked away from our marriage, I didn't just walk away from her. I walked away from the version of myself that had spent years loving her unconditionally. When I handed her the divorce papers, her face crumbled. It wasn't what she expected. She thought this was just another argument, another rough patch we'd work through. But for me, it was final. I was done, and I did not want to be part of whatever new adventure she was chasing. I wanted a partner, not a stranger who was already halfway out the door. At first, she tried to fight it. She called, texted, left long voicemails about how we could fix this. She swore she never meant for things to go so far. She even apologized, saying she was confused and had made a mistake. But by then, it was too late. She'd already crossed a line, and I had no interest in trying to pull us back from the edge. So, I did what I had to do. I stopped talking to her directly. Every word, every communication, went through my lawyer. I was playing her tune. She begged for court-mandated counseling, hoping it would buy her more time, maybe give her another shot at fixing things. But I refused. There was nothing left to save. I wasn't interested in sitting in a room and pretending there was a chance we could patch up what was broken. The court pushed for it, but I stood firm. I wasn't going to spend another minute trying to fix something that was beyond repair. A year. That's how long it took. A year of back and forth through lawyers, of Kathy delaying, stalling, holding on to the last shreds of what we used to be. But I didn't budge. I stayed focused, determined, even when it was hard. I'd spent too many years letting her control the narrative, and I wasn't going to let her drag this out any longer than necessary. The day the divorce was finalized was the first time I truly felt free in years. It wasn't easy. There were moments I thought maybe I should give in, make it easier on both of us. But I didn't. I knew what I wanted, and it wasn't the life we'd built together anymore. It was something new, something honest. I haven't spoken to Kathy since the day I filed those papers. She's a ghost in my life now, a chapter 1 closed for good. Whatever she's doing, whoever she's with, it's not my concern anymore. I'm focused on my own life, on building something real with someone who values the same things I do. And I wouldn't change a thing. 2 years later, Kathy is living alone now, in that same house we used to share, except now it's quiet. Men come and go, just like she wanted. She invites them into her bed looking for acceptance that she so dearly wanted. They stay for a night, maybe 2, then they leave. They use her, and she lets them. It's not the love and acceptance she dreamed about. It's a revolving door of emptiness. It's ironic, really, how hard she pushed for this idea, and now, it's all she has left. She's told people she feels lonely, that it's harder than she expected. Well, what did she expect? She opened a door she couldn't close, and now she's stuck in the mess she made. As for me, life's good. Damn good. After the divorce, I adopted 2 German shepherds, Max and Luna. Best decision I ever made. We go on hikes every weekend, rain or shine. There's something about the way they look at me, like they're reminding me that loyalty and companionship are still real things. And I met someone, Emily. She's different from Kathy in every way that matters. She's steady, kind, a widow who lost her husband, a Marine, a few years back. We understand each other in a way I never could with Kathy. There's no games, no power struggles, no need to explore outside of what we have together. Emily has a quiet strength, and being with her feels right in a way I haven't felt in a long, long time. Kathy once called me boring, said I wasn't adventurous enough. Well, if this is boring, then I'll take it. I've got my dogs, my health, and a woman who knows the value of real commitment. Kathy? She's got an empty house and a bed that's warm for a few hours at a time. Maybe that's the life she wanted, but as I look at Emily beside me, petting Max, I know I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.